Hello and welcome everyone. We're so happy to have you join us for this two-day Residential Retrofits for Energy Equity Summit, also known as R2E2 Summit. My name is Stephanie Sosa-Coulter. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Deputy Director for R2E2 at ACEEE. I'm excited to be the host for today's part of the summit. We'll begin with a few housekeeping announcements and then quickly move on to our amazing keynote. First, a word from our interpreters. Ana Vidales, to you to explain our Spanish language interpretation and how that'll work today.
Buenas tardes, good afternoon. We are Ana and Jordi Vidales, and we're going to be your interpreters this day. So I want to explain a little bit the interpreting function. I'm going to do it first in Spanish and then in English. Buenas tardes, soy Ana y Jordi Vidales. Vamos a ser sus intérpretes este día. Para poder escuchar la interpretación, una vez yo termine de explicar, se va a activar la función. Para poder escuchar esta reunión en español, ustedes van a ir a este pequeño icono que dice interpretación y van a elegir español. Ustedes tienen la opción de poner Mute Original Audio, de esa manera solo van a escuchar a la intérprete. Si ustedes dejan esto abierto, entonces van a escuchar a la intérprete a un 80% y al ponente principal a un 20%. Esto lo van a hacer si se están uniendo a esta reunión por medio de computadora. Si ustedes están por medio de su iPad o su teléfono, entonces van a ver 3 puntitos que dicen More. Entonces, usted aprieta More, se va a English and Spanish Language y elige el español. Es bien importante que si usted lo está haciendo por medio de teléfono o iPad, una vez usted haya elegido su lenguaje, tiene que poner Done. Good afternoon. As I was saying, we were going to be your interpreters for these 2 days. And if you want to hear if somebody is participating in Spanish or is asking a question, we're going to simultaneously interpret their participation. So you can go to the interpretation button and choose English. You have the option to mute original audio. That way you can just hear the interpreter. If you leave it open, you will hear the interpreter at an 80% and the speaker at a 20%. If you are joining us through a computer or an iPad, you have to go through the 3 little dots that say More. Then you go interpretation, you choose your language of preference, and then you pick Done. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Ana. Thank you, Ana. So first and foremost, I'd like to thank our funders for their support of R2E2 and for making this free summit possible. And now moving on to housekeeping announcements. Attendees are in listen-only mode. You can turn on your video. Please use the chat feature on the bottom bar of your screen to ask questions of the presenters. We will have time for Q&A at the end of each session. If you prefer to verbally ask a question, you can raise your hand using the reactions feature located at the bottom bar, but we really do prefer that you ask your questions in the chat. You will be prompted to unmute and ask your question during our Q&A segment. All of our presentation recordings, slides, and attendee directory will be emailed to you after the summit. If you applied for the stipend for community-based organizations, we will contact you after the summit. Stipend availability may be limited based on demand. If at any point you leave the summit and are unable to get back in, it is possible that we have met our attendance cap of 1,000 participants. In that case, check your email for instructions on how to access the live stream of the summit on YouTube. So a little bit about R2E2. Residential Retrofits for Energy Equity, R2E2, is a new nationwide initiative that will provide training to state, local, and tribal governments, as well as community-based organizations and other partners to jumpstart energy upgrades for affordable housing that will lower utility bills, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, improve residents' health, create good-paying local jobs, and help advance racial equity. R2E2 is a partnership of the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, ACEEE, Elevate, Emerald Cities Collaborative, and HRNA advisors. R2E2 will offer guidance on energy upgrade financing models, economic inclusion, navigating the complexities of the affordable housing sector, and engaging with community-based organizations to ensure proposals reflect community needs. People's Climate Innovation Center is advising R2E2 on centering equity in the project and its outcomes, and on facilitating community-driven planning processes. You'll be hearing from representatives of each partner organization and our strategic advisors over the course of the summit. This summit is tailored to local, state, and tribal government staff and community-based organizations. The content focuses on leveraging federal funding and multi-sector community-centered approaches to scaling up holistic retrofits in affordable housing to generate energy savings, health benefits, local jobs, and more equitable outcomes for residents. Today's agenda includes a keynote address from Delmar Gillus of Elevate, 2 presentations, a peer exchange section, and a panel discussion with 5 community-based organizations working on healthy, efficient, and equitable housing. Now, without further delay, I'll turn it over to Annika Brindle to introduce our keynote speaker.
Thank you, Stephanie. I am so pleased to be able to introduce our keynote speaker, Delmar Gillus, who will be speaking about equitable access to energy efficiency and electrification for marginalized communities. Delmar Gillus is the Chief Operating Officer of Elevate, responsible for operational workforce development and project management in Elevate's portfolio of clean energy projects. Gillus works to increase contractor diversity, deliver workforce development programs, create opportunities for diverse contractors in community solar programs, and ensure smart grid programs are accessible to all Illinois utility customers. He played a critical role in passing Illinois' Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, working to ensure the legislation centered equity and created project opportunities and jobs in underserved environmental justice communities. He is active in boards and advisory councils such as the Illinois Future of Work Task Force, the Building Performance Association, and the Illinois Environmental Council. Outside of work, he volunteers with the Chicagoland National Society of Black Engineers alumni chapter, mentoring young engineers in pre-college initiative programs. Please feel free to add your questions for Delmar Gillus into the chat. And without further ado, welcome, Delmar.
Well, thank you very much, Annika. It is a great honor and a pleasure to be the keynote speaker for this year's R2E2 Summit. I'd like to start off first and foremost by thanking ACEEE and the other sponsors for hosting this great event. But I especially want to thank Annika and Carolyn and Nick, who are doing a lot of the work behind the scenes to help corral the speakers like myself and assist us in getting ready for the next 2 days. So thank you to all of you for your support and help. As I was thinking about preparing for this conference, there were a lot of things that were kind of going through my head. As many of you know, I spend a lot of time working in the equity space. And as I was thinking about my remarks, one of the things that was really important to me was to connect the dots between the equity work that I've been doing and the conference. And the good news is this: as I was looking through the agendas of speakers and panels and events, every speaker, every panel, every event is focused on centering equity, is focused on inclusion. So I'm just going to give kind of a high level of some of the equity topics that are really important to me and that I'm passionate about. But I really encourage all of you, if you can find the time, to really dig into the agenda and really try to pick out hopefully all of the events. But if you can't make all of them, pick out the ones that really resonate with you, because there's a really great slate of speakers and panels. Before I dive into equity, though, I think it's really important to kind of think about and talk about the ecosystem that we're currently working in. If you think back, pre-COVID, the clean energy economy was growing at roughly 5 times the rate of the rest of the economy. There were jobs being created, there was funding available, and overall there was a focus on we need to start wrangling with this climate challenge that's before us. But unfortunately with COVID, which was an extreme challenge that disproportionately impacted communities of color, a lot of the progress toward our climate goals slowed, and rightfully so. One of the things that I was really passionate about was to refocus on communities during that time. So I personally want to thank all of you and your organizations that did things like bring people water and ensure people had affordable housing and access to healthcare during that very tragic time. Every little bit helped, and through the grace of God, we were able to kind of get through the majority of the pandemic. And now what we're starting to see is that things are starting to pick up again. We're starting to see that level of investment return. We're starting to see more programs and projects and legislation moving forward. And my hope and what I'm seeing is that we're going to return to that period where we were seeing growth in the clean energy space at 5 times the rate of the rest of the economy. But the news is not all good in that space. When you start looking at the commitments that were made as part of the Paris Climate Agreement, many of the countries aren't meeting the commitments and the obligations that they committed to. So what does that mean as we work toward our climate goals? On the equity side, we're seeing a lot of familiar patterns where 10% of the clean energy workers are diverse workers. We're seeing other patterns like 5% of the contractors are diverse or people of color. When you start to really break that down, when you look at Indigenous women, Black women, Latina women, the numbers are even more scary. You start seeing numbers in the 1% range. So the question that I have around that is this okay? Is this the pattern that we want to continue to follow? But the good news to me, and I'm very much an optimist, so I like to see the positive side of things, is that we all are in the right place at the right time, having the right conversation. And this conference is an example of that. Right now, even as we speak, federal funding through the Infrastructure Reduction Act and through the infrastructure bill are moving. I'm sorry, I got my bills wrong. The infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act are actively being implemented, and we're trying to figure out how to utilize that money. States like Illinois have implemented the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, which is a bill which we affectionately call CEJA, that is centered on equity. And really focuses on how do you include marginalized communities in the activities that are taking place at this time. But we have to be careful. One of the things that people that know me well often hear me say is that we all breathe the same air, we drink the same water, and we share the same energy resources. So if we address climate change in only affluent communities, my question to everyone is, will we reach our global climate goals? I think the answer to that, at least to me, is no. So as we're looking at these climate challenges, if we're able to implement and do retrofits and energy efficient work in affluent communities, but then the community of marginalized community next to a fossil fuel plant that's putting poison in the water and poison in the air, that pollution blows into the affluent community, and the poison water runs downstream the river and is the drinking water for other communities. So unlike things like the internet or cable TV or computers, we can address these things in affluent communities and then leave other communities to catch up. If we use that strategy, we will not meet our climate goals, and all of us will suffer for that. So the question that I have that that I like to talk about, and hopefully we'll have some additional learnings on through the conference, is what do we need to do to create an equitable approach to the clean energy economy, and what do we need to do differently? I want to start where I started before, which is with the bills, the infrastructure bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, CEJA. All of these bills are putting billions of dollars into our economy. But what are we doing to make sure that those dollars get the frontline communities? There's programs like Justice 40, and I put a link in the chat, in my good morning hello chat, to a website that touches on that. We need to make sure those dollars get the frontline community so that they have access. What are we doing to work with CBOs in our community? One of the things that we did in CEJA that was critically important is one word. CEJA is based on one word. It's based on the word listen. Oftentimes, we as engineers, and I'm a mechanical engineer by training, we know what the technical solution is. We know how to retrofit a building. We know how to do electrification work. But are we engaging the community in a discussion on what they need? I often share a story, and I even have this discussion with my wife around induction stoves. If we don't do a good job of doing outreach and communicating and engaging on this new technology, it may not be accepted. Many communities and many cultures are very used to that gas flame. And when you take that away and replace it with something electric, they're like, oh, that's not going to work. How are we engaging in these conversations around induction stoves, around heat pumps, around waterless water heaters? We have to have these discussions at the community level. What are we doing related to workforce development? You can look back to multiple federal initiatives where the approach was this. It's like, there's a lot of money. We'll carve out a percentage for Black and brown communities. We'll train people, give them a training certificate, and then wish them well. And many of those folks remain underemployed, without access to whatever new technology or new process we were trying to work toward. And in a state of the government did it to us again, where they got our hopes up, they trained us, and then when we went to get jobs, there were no opportunities. So one of the questions I'm working hard to answer, and hopefully we answered some of it with CEJA, is how do we create jobs instead of training certificates? For Black and brown contractors that, remember, I mentioned Black women, 1%, Latinas women, 1%, Indigenous women, 1-2%. How do we get those numbers up? We have to assist people in getting access to projects. And that ties into some of the points that I think are critically important around, as we write legislation, as we work on bills, is we focus our efforts on making sure that the incentives are right, that the reporting is transparent, and that we work toward the word that I mentioned, which is listen. How we build these programs is as important as if, or even more important than the technology. So in closing, there's a couple of things that I hope we all take away from this conference. One is that we don't have to figure this stuff out on our own. Many of the speakers, many of the sessions, if you go through the agenda, there are experts that are talking about how to do this. The second thing that's important is making sure that these dollars that are cascading down from the federal government, from philanthropy, from private, are able to connect up with our communities and our CBOs. And the third thing to me that's most important is around relationship. Like I said, we have the technical expertise. We know what needs to be done. But how are we engaging? How are we listening? Because here's what's also interesting. If a business engages with a diverse contractor, not only does that contractor benefit, but I guarantee you that that business will get access to an untapped marketplace in the community from which that diverse contractor came from. So there are mutually beneficial reasons for us to work together, to collaborate, and to partner. So once again, as I leave you all, I just want to once again have a call to action that as you're thinking about your programs, ask yourself the question, how are we addressing equity in this program? Ask yourself the question, have you engaged a local community group as we're looking to retrofit their building or their home or their community? Ask yourself the question, are we able to meet our global climate goals if we don't include everybody? And what are the benefits of having an inclusive, all hands, everyone's in approach to addressing our climate needs? Once again, I want to say thank you to ACEEE for this great opportunity to share some thoughts around equity. And I'd just like to end by saying thank you to all of you. I look forward to answering your questions either live or in the chat. And if there's anything that I can do to assist, I'm very happy to both learn from you, to share what I know, but most importantly, to listen. Thank you and have a great conference.
Thank you so much, Delmar. I love that focus on asking questions that you haven't asked before and on listening. We're running a little short on time, so I'm going to ask you one question, and then thank you for that offer to answer additional questions in the chat. Folks, feel free to add questions there for Delmar, and he'll work through them as he has the chance. I'm wondering what advice you would give to state and local governments or to CBOs on how to engage to ensure they really do build an authentic and equitable partnership. You know, beyond listening, what practical advice is there, or what common mistakes and stumbling blocks do you see happening?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the biggest thing, and once again, it is tied to that kind of listen concept, is that programs get built and developed without the contribution and input of CBOs. Many of the things that need to be done technically, oh, we've done technology, we understand it. Oh, we've done training before, we don't need help. And I don't think there's any malicious intent around that. But what tends to happen that many people miss out on is that they don't get the level of buy-in that they need. So if I were to give some just high-level bullets of things to do, is first and foremost, engage, and as part of that engagement process, to listen. The second part is to design your solutions with the community-based organizations at the table, so you're getting input into the process, not input after it's completed. Utilize community resources. There's a lot of great trainers and Black and brown businesses that would love to have an opportunity to work on clean energy projects. And then, as I mentioned in my remarks, build your incentives around a drive toward the climate goal and the equity goal, and then have transparent reporting so that we all can see how you're doing. And to use that reporting not to chastise, but if someone isn't meeting the goals, to figure out ways that we can help and uplift. So that would be what I would definitely recommend, is to build collaborations, teams, and groups that include the people that will be most impacted by the work, so that we can then have holistic solutions that are community-centric. But great question.
Thanks so much, Delmar. I think you really set us up for the rest of the conversations we're going to be having today and tomorrow, and touched on a bunch of the themes that we're hoping to highlight around really building programs that achieve multiple benefits and that are driven by community priorities. So thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thank you. And as I said, I'm looking forward to kind of digging into the chat, and just want to wish everyone a great summit. And if I can do anything to help along the way, I'm definitely happy to do that. Thanks again, Annika.
Thanks so much. I'm turning things back over to Stephanie.
Thanks, Annika. Again, as Annika said, thank you so much, Delmar, for opening the summit with those inspiring words. Now I'd like to invite Henry Love of Elevate on to deliver our first presentation, Building Retrofits, Basics and Benefits. Throughout the presentation, please put your questions for Henry in the chat, and we will keep track of them for Q&A at the end. Welcome, Henry.
Thank you, Stephanie. All right, hopefully everyone can see my presentation. I would like to give a thank you, first of all, to Mary Jo Worsko, who did the heavy lifting on this presentation, is giving me the honor of presenting it to you all today. She will join me later for the Q&A if we have time. First of all, this is the name of this presentation is Building Retrofits, Basics and Benefits. I am Henry Love, the Principal Director of Municipal and Community Programs at Elevate. So first off, I thought the R2E2, we went over some of this, but it's the Residential Retrofits for Energy Equity. It's a nationwide initiative that will provide training for state and local tribal governments, community-based organizations, jumpstart energy upgrades for affordable housing that will lower utility bills, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, improve residents' health, create good paying local jobs, and help advance racial equity. It's a partnership of the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, Elevate, Emerald Cities Collaborative, and HRNA advisors. R2E2 will offer guidance on energy upgrade financing models, economic inclusion, navigating the complexities of the affordable housing sector, engaging with community-based organizations to ensure proposals reflect community needs. And the People's Climate Innovation Center is advising R2E2 on centering climate equity in the project and its outcomes on facilitating community-driven planning processes. I believe we're going to have a poll at this time. All right. So the learning objectives of this presentation, by the end of this webinar, you should be able to define the term retrofit, recognize the general areas covered in a building retrofit, identify the stakeholders involved, explain the need for focusing retrofits in affordable housing, detail the energy benefits and non-energy benefits resulting from a retrofit, describe who receives the benefits and their impact, and use the concepts presented to begin researching and developing a retrofit program in your area. So what is a retrofit? A retrofit is an addition or update of technology from an older system. In comparison to a remodel, a retrofit focuses on technology rather than the aesthetics. So a remodel's goal is to make a home more attractive, change decor and finishes, and you work with an interior designer, a general contractor, or specialty trades, as opposed to a retrofit, which the goal is to make a building more efficient or perform better. You're usually updating HVAC systems, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, plumbing, the building envelope, insulation, air sealing, windows, and ventilation. So this is usually completed by mechanical, electrical, plumbing, engineering contractors, general contractors, and specialty trades. So what areas are included in a retrofit? The baseline things that are included would be energy efficiency, water conservation, health and safety improvements, electrification of the home, switching away from fossil fuels, or adding renewable energy to your home. Other opportunities that you could explore are having smart capabilities with smart devices and building automation, having energy storage for management of renewable energy, or having a backup in case of power outages, or adding EV charging if you have an electric vehicle. I think we're going to have another poll at this point. All right. Move on. So what is included in energy efficiency? Energy efficiency is tuning up or repairing or replacing heating and cooling systems, hot water systems, trying to improve or reduce air leakage and improve the building envelope that keeps cold air or warm air in or out based on the temperature outside, switching out to more efficient lighting, changing out your appliances to more efficient appliances, and changing out your windows for more efficient windows. You can see the graphic on the right shows some of the large energy users in most affordable housing units. So what is included in water conservation is the tune-up, repair, or replacement of hot water systems, plumbing. If you have leaks, ensure you're not losing water and pressure. Fixtures, toilets, showers, irrigation systems, and stormwater management systems. To the right, you'll also see a breakout of common distribution of where people spend their money on water. Fun fact, high efficiency toilets pay themselves back in under a year. Keep that in mind. So what is included in renewable energy? Systems like solar, geothermal, battery storage are typical systems that would be paired with housing. And as you can see in this chart to the right, multifamily housing compared to other commercial buildings has a pretty low adoption rate of renewable energy on site. There's a lot of complications, and we may get into some of that later. So what is included in health and safety? Combustion safety, making sure you're not leaking gases into your home. Ventilation, making sure that there's air exchanges and fresh air is coming from outside and being exchanged, so you're breathing fresh oxygen. Pest management, to ensure things aren't, critters aren't getting in and causing all sorts of damage inside your home. Active design, making sure that homes adapt to people as they age or have any sort of disabilities that need to accommodate them so they can stay in their home. Or toxin abatement like lead, mold, asbestos, or radon. There's lots of sources of indoor pollutants that could prop up from different issues in the home, such as if a bathroom doesn't have really good ventilation, the moisture can stay in and create mold and mildew and odors, or things like having not good ventilation of your home to move air outside can cause particulate matter to aggregate inside and contribute to lower indoor air quality, such as running a gas stove or having any sort of smoke or combustion happening in the home. So what types of buildings can be retrofitted? Well, all types, residential, commercial, industrial, public facilities. Really the term covers any type of facility where you're upgrading the equipment and appliances or building systems to make them more efficient. We're talking with a focus on affordable housing today. We're really talking about public housing, subsidized housing, or naturally occurring unsubsidized housing that is still affordable for the people who rent it. Important to note that affordability means that both the rent and the cost of the utilities is affordable for its occupants. The sizes can range from everything from single family homes to small apartment buildings to large multifamily complexes or campuses. And there can be a lot of complications in the ownership structure. Some homes are owner occupied, some are renter occupied, or some have complicated structures where the buildings are separate from the land they're on, like a condo or land trust. So why are we focusing on affordable housing? Well, there's a lack of dedicated resources and institutions serving affordable housing. Most utility retrofit programs are best suited for market rate and owner occupied and single family homes. And affordable housing often faces environmental discrimination and injustice in the way that it is zoned and where it's approved to be built. Affordable housing has many constraints on its budgets, whether it's subsidized or naturally occurring, and trying to maintain a low rent. That can lead to deferred maintenance of energy and water systems that can cause damage, health and safety issues, or other costs that can make it difficult to justify investing in energy efficiency. And in many places, there is a diminishing stock of affordable housing. So how can retrofits be undertaken? By building owners for an individual building. Building owners who own multiple buildings can look across their portfolio and make improvements. Governments, utilities, nonprofits, community-based organizations for community buildings like senior centers, recreational facilities, libraries. by governments, utilities, and nonprofits and community-based organizations for multiple buildings in a region. How are they funded? Typically, the owner or investor needs to provide some capital. They may want to get some sort of loan, either a subsidized loan from the government, use utility incentives, or get private loans from a lender. And also some have access to getting grant funds or subsidies or other types of incentives through existing local programs, federal programs. So who are the stakeholders in affordable housing retrofits? It is the building owners, the property managers, government agencies that get involved in affordable housing and regulation of energy, philanthropic, community or private funders, nonprofits, community-based organizations, and the renters and community residents. So how can buildings upgrades benefit underserved communities? They can increase climate resilience and reduce greenhouse gas emission and air pollution. They can lessen reliance on fossil fuels equipment in the home, enable families to maintain safe indoor temperatures during extreme weather, which can help prevent them from getting sick. Improving health, comfort, and safety, reducing their exposure to mold, moisture, and lead, improving indoor air quality, lowering the risk of gas leaks or explosions, reducing ER visits and missed days of work and school-related to asthma and other respiratory diseases, and improving mental health. Another benefit is increased affordability, reducing energy bills for people with low and moderate incomes. As I mentioned earlier, that's rent plus the cost of utilities determines whether something is affordable as a household. So improving the long-term housing affordability and stability is important, and freeing up household budgets for essential needs such as food and medicine. Another benefit is strengthening the local economy, something that Delmar was touching on earlier, promoting equity via women and minority-owned businesses, business development and inclusive procurement to deliver these services, and creating local jobs through job training to be able to know how to install and service energy efficient equipment. Another very important benefit is promoting racial equity and ensuring retrofits benefit BIPOC communities that have been excluded from past policies, address frontline community priorities, and center community leadership, especially voices from BIPOC renters and marginalized communities. We're going to have another poll at this point. Thank you. Okay, so what are some of the challenges? It can be very difficult to acquire funding for retrofits. Lenders do not normally understand how to underwrite the fact that you might be saving energy, and that's actually a source of revenue to you. You're more financially stable, so it can be difficult to justify that to a traditional lender. Identifying and selecting contractors who understand the technology and making sure that they know how it works and how to optimize the system so that you are achieving that energy efficiency, you are saving money in the end. There can be competing priorities of the stakeholders, the renters, the owners, the lenders. This can often be cited between the renters and owners as a split incentive. And just trying to figure out how you can solve for that so that the occupants can benefit and the building owner isn't compromising their ability to make a return on their investment in their building. Existing building conditions, which must be addressed before retrofits can be safely installed. These are these health and safety issues, structural issues, anything that needs to be remediated, like lead or mold or asbestos, that can cause a lot of upfront costs before you can even consider improving the systems. Existing building systems require significant upgrades or modifications. If it's really a really old building with really old systems, it may not lend itself well to adopting some of the newer advanced technology, and that can cause some significant challenges or added costs. Also, educating tenants on best practices and shifting their behavior. As much as this technology is more efficient, the way that you use it and manage it in your life and with your behavior can really maximize the cost savings that can be achieved. And if you do things that are at odds with the idea of having more efficient systems, like heat your home with your window open on a cold day, you're kind of not achieving the savings that you should. Also climate, existing building issues, and required behavior change can complicate system design and equipment selection. So I've heard plenty of stories of programs that have installed like a Nest thermostat in a elderly care facility, and people can't figure out how to use it, and they wind up taking them out and putting in the old types of systems again. You got to work with the tenants and make sure that they understand what the technology is, how to use it, and really make sure that they benefit from it. All right. So I'd like to talk about a case study to give a more tangible example of what this can look like. In this case, this is a project from Madison, Wisconsin, with an owner called Commonwealth Development. This was a project that Elevate worked on with a local partner in Madison called Sustain Dane and Renew Wisconsin, and was funded in part by the USDN, the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. The goal was to electrify a 4-unit affordable multifamily building and change out their existing heating systems to air source heat pumps and weatherize the building to make sure it had a really tight building shell and maximize the efficiency of the new heating system. Overall, the resilience benefits to the occupants was that it reduced overall operating costs and created a $0 bill for heating and cooling for each residential unit, because they master metered the building and eliminated the need for the tenants to pay for it. So the environmental benefits was that it converted gas to electric heating, and that resulted in a 70% reduction in carbon emissions, which is 4.2 tons annually and 63 tons over the 15-year lifetime of those heat pumps. There was a solar system installed, which is a 20 kilowatt solar array, which offset the entire centralized heating and cooling system load. So solar became the primary fuel for heating and cooling the home, which resulted in that massive reduction in costs to the tenants. So overall, there was a turnkey cost of $135,000, and there were that resulted in a $425 annual operating cost reduction, and tenants received a little over $1,100 in energy savings per year. So how that program was delivered was through, or project was delivered was through a program called an Efficiency Navigator, which is a one-stop shop approach to helping owners of small, medium-sized multifamily housing to become more efficient and resilient while reducing their operating costs and keeping their units as affordable. So that program's goal was housing resilience and fostering innovation to help preserve affordable workforce housing. Equity, addressing the intersection of environmental, social, and economic justice for cost-burdened residents. And climate change, reducing energy and water demand in our existing building stock to tackle the effects of climate change. So that's the programmatic structure in which this retrofit was delivered for that project. To date, the Wisconsin Efficiency Navigator, which was funded in part by the Wisconsin Public Service Commission, has assessed 86 units. It has an average annual energy savings of 21% for those units. Has reduced costs by 11% for residents, and is reduced over 26,000 tons of greenhouse gas, which is equivalent to over 5,700 cars driven for a year. So 33 different energy conservation measures at 10 properties that add up to those 86 units that were served, and almost 500 MMBTUs of energy savings, which is equivalent of just eliminating the energy use of 14 of those apartments. And overall, $5,800 in annual cost savings. So a pretty significant impact for the people who live there, and really great environmental impact at the same time. So really solving for that intersection of environmental benefits and equity benefits for the tenants at the same time. So I'd like to talk about building retrofit best practices. Delmar touched on this. We got to be inclusive and bring people together to talk about the process and make sure that everybody's on the same page. You should include tenants and occupants, residents as a primary stakeholder in the process, and center efforts around equity and inclusion. You really need to look beyond the energy and cost savings when setting these goals, because in the end, you're trying to make for a better living environment for the occupants, a healthier, safer environment. You're reducing their costs. Overall, through programmatic structures like I just talked about, you can find ways to braid funding together and bring in different resources so that the owner of the building is doing something that is cost effective for them and also benefits their tenants at the same time. So in summary, retrofit aims to increase the efficiency of a building. Building retrofits address many systems within a building, including but not limited to energy, water, renewable energy, health and safety. The stakeholders in funding, planning, and implementation of retrofits are generally property owners, governmental agencies, utilities, nonprofits, private funders, and community-based organizations. And for a variety of reasons, including racial and economic inequity, the need for retrofits in affordable housing properties should be a focus of retrofit programs. A variety of benefits, both energy and non-energy, are derived from retrofits, which positively impact stakeholders from individual renters to the entire planet. So I think we have our last poll as part of this presentation. Thank you very much. I believe our presentations will be provided to folks afterwards, but we do have some resources and places to look for more information about affordable multifamily retrofits and the impacts they can make from some great organizations such as ACEEE, USDN, and the U.S. Department of Energy and the Building Energy Exchange. So thank you very much to our funders, the Rockefeller Foundation, JP Morgan Chase, JPB Foundation, and Wells Fargo. And thank you to our partners, ACEEE, HRNA, Emerald Cities, and our strategic advisor, People's Climate Innovation Center. So I think now we can move to Q&A if we have time.
Thank you, Henry. During the Q&A, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, please submit them using the chat on the right. Please feel free to upvote any questions that you find particularly interesting and would like answered. I will pass it on to Henry and Mary Jo.
Hello, everybody. I'm Mary Jo. I'm going to be feeding your questions that I've been logging from the chat. We have a lot of them. I don't know that we'll have time for all of them, but we will do our best effort to get through as many as we can and try and answer any remaining ones after the presentation. So first question, whose responsibility will be the EV charging retrofits? Would that be the city, the state, or the utility?
That is a great question. If you integrate EV charging into a retrofit program, I think a big assumption you're making is that, especially for affordable housing, do your tenants actually drive EVs? Do they have access to EVs? Are there affordable electric vehicle options for them? And does that necessitate a need to add EV charging so that you're being equitable in trying to provide them a place to park their car safely and charge it? So I think depending on the situation of the building and the building owner and the tenants, you need to determine whether that was a viable investment that should be made, and if there are any programs out there that can help subsidize that cost, because those exist in several markets for sure.
Next question, for those, and I think this is more to, attendees as well, for those who have rebate programs, what appliances do many of you rebate?
Typically, in a lot of utility programs provide rebates for things that improve energy efficiency. Many of them cannot pay for a switch between a natural gas and electric appliance for various reasons. What we do have coming down the line right now from the federal government and the DOE are the Inflation Reduction Act incentives, which can provide rebates for things like heat pumps, solar, and other energy efficient technologies. So I think one of the goals of the programs that we want you to consider is how do you start to pull in the different rebates from different sources and make those available to the target housing stock that you're trying to deliver them to.
Okay, next question. I think this was relatively straightforward. What is the high efficiency toilet?
Yeah, so toilets are measured by gallons per flush. And so a high efficiency toilet uses fewer gallons per flush. The standard toilet, I think, is like 3.5 gallons or 3.2 gallons per flush. And some high efficiency toilets can be down to, I think, like 0.7 or so. I might be overstating that, but I have seen them in action. An important thing to note about high efficiency toilets is that user experience is very important, and people want a toilet that works. So even if it's a high efficiency, you got to make sure that it's one that works well.
Yeah. Next question. Do you have any resources on using passive solar in homes? I know there's a lot of extraction involved in solar panel and battery manufacturing, so want to limit as much as possible.
Yeah, I think there are plenty of resources out there around using passive solar in homes, either as like solar thermal, where you're heating some sort of glycol system or something like that to provide water heating, or if you're trying to gear your home itself to maximize the use of solar that hits it, whether you can adjust your how you're getting solar gain on your household or eliminating solar gain by having shading or trees or other types of kind of protection from solar hitting your household.
Okay, next one specific to affordable and low and moderate income retrofits. We often find that LMI neighborhoods have trouble funding retrofits. Are there any specific funding sources for LMI residents to tap into? Redlining has made home values less, thus excluding them from traditional funding pathways.
Yeah, this is definitely a big issue when we're talking about investing in all of this fancy energy efficient equipment and solar. The cost starts to rack up, and you're thinking about that in relation to the value of the home. I think it's generally accepted that we'd expect in LMI communities that there's some level of subsidy or grants that are made available, and we wouldn't be expecting people to finance these types of upgrades, especially if there wasn't a clear reduction in their costs. As Delmar mentioned earlier, we need to solve for the equity and climate issues at the same time, which means we can't reduce greenhouse gas emissions just and then expect people to pay higher bills. So I think that's part of the overall program design that people need to consider is your baseline that you at least don't increase people's costs? Are you going to give them some sort of subsidy? Or are you going to give them access to lower cost financing that has lower thresholds for things like credit scores, or eliminates the requirements for people to have credit scores, which is a huge equity issue. So I think it's all part of as we progress through this summit and hear about a lot more components of what a really effective program could be, that we can start figuring out what might work to best serve these communities.
Excellent. Next question. Renters are usually left out in energy efficiency programs for various reasons. What are some solutions to assure that renters have access?
Yes, so there are some things that renters can do, and there's lots of like direct install programs where you can change out light bulbs and add weather stripping, small improvements. But changing out the big systems, that's where really having a focus on working with the owner and the tenant at the same time, you can try and work towards making an offering with a program that would be advantageous to both and convince a building owner to move forward with improving the systems. Because in the end, there's a lot of risk with providing a house or a home to someone that is not energy efficient, that is not healthy, that has inconsistent heating and cooling. because that compromises that the renter's ability to pay their bills and makes them want to leave. So if you have a lot of turnover in rental housing, that's a cost to the owner that they should see. It's better to try and provide good housing to their tenants and ensure that their tenant wants to stay there. And I think that a lot of that comes with kind of some of this negotiation and bringing them together to talk about what improvements would make the most sense and have a dual benefit. But it's not easy.
Okay, next question. When retrofitting naturally occurring affordable housing, how can we best maintain affordability and not displace existing residents?
Yeah, I noticed in that there's in parentheses there a non-deed restricted affordable housing. So I was going to point definitely to utilizing some tools like deed restrictions called affordability covenants, which can be used to lock a rental unit into a certain, like it can't rent past a certain price based on area median income. That's a great tool. You can get voluntary agreements. You can get a signed contract with, if you're providing incentives that if they raise the rents after you provide these incentives, that they have to pay that back. So have some sort of penalty in place. But yeah, it is complicated on how you can say we want to invest in what is in a household that houses someone who might have low to moderate income, but is owned by somebody who does not have low to moderate income, because in the end, that investment benefits the owner. So you have to find some tool and enforce it to ensure that you're keeping that rent affordable for the occupant. And that's very important, enforcing it. Or else, you know, you're kind of not really solving the problem that you're set out to solve.
Right. I think that, something that another person put in the question list is, how do you deal with the split incentive of the owner has the cost of certain upgrades and the renter benefit?
Yeah, it is a problem that plagues energy efficiency programs and all sorts of investments that would be good for the tenants, that if the owner doesn't see a return on investment for themselves, or they don't see a benefit in doing anything any more than the bare minimum, meeting code or meeting any sort of local regulations, you have to provide some sort of incentive. And if you unless they want to do it out of the goodness of their heart. There are definitely landlords out there that will do that. But these are investment properties to them. And so you have to find ways that if you want them to take certain actions, you can provide them incentives, you can provide them services, hand-holding through the process to make sure that they stay on track to move forward and make those improvements. But you also need some sort of guarantee that they're going to maintain the affordability of that unit, or you could just basically pay for them to gentrify themselves. We don't want to see that happen. So it's a very difficult problem to fix, but there are some good programmatic structures out there that can fix that. Even things like green leases where tenants and owners can share in the cost of upgrades if they're really interested in making them move forward. Yeah, other like the one-stop shop approach that we pointed to, where you have that hand holding, but also provide grants and incentives and get some form of agreement to ensure that the rents don't go up.
I do want to address, there were some questions about our case studies. And this is the problem of having one person create slides and another person present. But just wanted to do my little correction on the Commonwealth case study that was presented, in that is still in the design stage. There have not been any retrofits done. The numbers that were provided for that case study are just estimates based on what, the assessments that were done and the opportunities that were identified for that. There are a lot of questions about, getting more information from those two programs. So, we'll do our best to try and disseminate information. And we do have a really great paper that was written up on those programs. So we will make sure we provide that to everyone. question is anyone measuring specific health benefits in the retrofit building?
So some programs are attempting to measure health outcomes. This takes long-term tracking to ensure that you're making a change and the intention is to improve occupant health, but then you need to follow up and make sure that, you know, things like hospital visits are going down or sick days are being reduced, or whatever your intended health impacts are. You need to make sure that you're measuring them and not just assuming that they take place, because you can't just make an improvement and expect that the impact will happen. You need to follow up. But yes, I think there's a lot of great synergy between making energy efficiency improvements and improving occupant health and safety, especially around improving indoor air quality. So hopefully, we can also integrate those co-benefits and try and make sure it's part of the overall program designs that any of you come up with.
Okay, another question. Are there any key measures, especially regarding health and safety, you would particularly recommend that would keep us on the map and ahead of the game?
Yeah, I don't know if I'll get in trouble for saying this. Remove combustion from your home. I think that's a big one. Getting the combustion of natural gas out of your home can improve indoor air quality. Also, making sure you have really effective ventilation so that you can control the air that comes in and make sure that the air in your home gets exchanged and moved out. A home breathes. It needs to bring air in, it needs to let air out. But being able to control that can ensure it can be filtered, or you can control where it's coming from and also expelled from the household. So if you do have indoor air particulates, or if you have a really tight building shell and just not a lot of air can get in naturally through cracks and spaces in between the walls and the rim of your building and through the attic, you have to exchange the air or it gets stale and the amount of oxygen in your house is reduced. So I think that's something that we all need to be taking a lot of care with, is ensuring that we can make a super energy efficient building that controls indoor air quality, but we've got to make sure that we're focusing on the quality of that air continuing to be very good for the occupant.
Okay. Another question related to that is, how do you measure occupant health and safety?
Occupant health and safety. So some of the measures on occupant health and safety is like the number of sick days that people experience in a year, days of missed work, days of missed school, asthma morbidity or other cardiovascular respiratory diseases, and how many times people are hospitalized for those things. And otherwise, it can be things like injuries in the household if the home has structural issues or like any sort of hazards that could injure somebody. These are things that you can measure to improve occupant health and safety.
Okay.
Yep.
And somebody wanted to know also, besides the health and safety, how are the economic benefits monitored?
Yeah, the best way to measure or monitor the economic benefits is to follow up and ask people to see if their bills have gone down. Getting copies to measure what happened the year before and the year after, and see if there is a significant reduction in their utility costs. It's important to do that and verify. As I said, we can install stuff and we have a theory that it's going to save money, but unless the systems are used properly and the occupants know how to use them and know other tips and tricks to ensure that they improve the overall efficiency with their behavior, they may not realize the full benefits and may not see the cost reductions that we would expect. So it's following up. It's a common theme here.
Yeah. And here's a question, something we come across with our own programs in doing retrofits on aging stock. How do you address the other issues that come with an aging affordable housing stock in order to do retrofit?
This is a very sticky issue because a lot of buildings weren't built to stand for, 70, 80, 100 plus years. That was never the intention of them, or at least it's not what their initial, how they designed it was to say this building is going to stand for 100 years. So buildings go through a cycle of reinvestment over time. If they're subsidized, they have to go through reinvestment over time. But when homes were built before codes were in place in the 60s, there's a lot of variability that might not make sense with like how you want to upgrade that building and make it very energy efficient. So you might need to go through what's called like a gut rehab and really tear things down to the studs and rebuild on the core skeleton of that building, a much more efficient building shell and better systems. That's very expensive. So finding ways to retrofit a building that is older, I know there's lots of resources out there on case studies of how to like retrofit historic buildings and things like that, but you're dealing with really old systems like old boiler systems with the radiators and stuff like that. It's very hard to replace those with super energy efficient electrical systems. But we do have a lot of great advances in especially in heating and cooling technology with heat pumps that can kind of get around some of those issues with older systems. But it's not easy.
Okay. How do you decide which areas to undertake in a retrofit?
I think we always start with the core of health and safety, and you really want to make sure that you're starting with that foundation of a healthy and safe home, remediate any issues with lead, mold, asbestos, and then go from there. And that's, as I mentioned earlier, can present some pretty significant upfront costs to just get to that point. But before, I think that's kind of the baseline. After that, I think it's generally the best practice that you kind of want to rip the Band-Aid off if you can and do as much as possible at once, especially if you're going to open up walls or if you're going to replace your roof. These types of actions can be paired with other improvements that might really help. Like I saw in the chat, somebody mentioned knob and tube wiring. Like if I'm going to replace all the knob and tube wiring in my house, old style electrical wiring, and I'm going to be opening up walls and replacing all this stuff, I should probably also consider putting in insulation and air sealing around my house and making, while I've got people poking in all these places in my home and opening things up, get other things done that make sense to do at the same time, because it'll just cost more money to go back and do it later. So thinking ahead about your total plan and the vision for your improvements that you want to make, and then figuring out, if I'm going to do this, should I also do this at the same time? That of course is easier said than done, because people need access to incentives and capital and just the money to be able to make those improvements, and that can be its own challenge.
Okay. Here's the question getting to the core of some things going on right now. How scalable are affordable housing retrofits? Are there common housing stock designs that can be planned for or purchased, or does each project tend to be custom?
I wish it were cookie cutter, but there actually are many of the processes that we go through in just figuring out how to create a retrofit program is to do a building stock analysis. There may be really common building stock. When there are big construction booms in communities that have happened at certain times, you wind up with pretty consistent building stock in certain areas of towns, based on the decade it was built in and the climate that you're in. So you can find those opportunities where you can improve the efficiency of the assessment process, know the common improvements better, cultivate a contractor network that is more accustomed and understands the buildings and the systems that can work for them. It is possible, but there's no telling who might have made some strange retrofit or remodel at some point to that housing. And so there will always be surprises and variability, but you can lock into some pretty standard approaches based on your common building stock.
Question, are there health insurance providers or foundations that are actually monetizing health improvements from energy efficiency measures?
There are some programs that have provided funding for projects that improve health and safety through health systems. I think there's a great example of Kaiser Permanente, the hospital system in California. built affordable housing that was highly efficient and very, very carefully controlled the indoor air quality of the building, because they could put income limited residents who had cardiovascular respiratory issues in that housing and guarantee better health outcomes for them. That's a pretty on the nose example that these health and safety issues and risks can be monetized in the form of reducing costs to the healthcare system. It's just, how do we get them to pay? That's the difficult piece of it, is figuring out how you get their money and incentives into the mix. Stephanie, are you giving us notice?
Yes, we're at time.
Okay.
Yeah. So
All
feel
right.
free to finalize your thoughts and then we can move on.
Well, just thank you all for joining us. We appreciate all the questions. There's an obvious interest in this. I wish we had time to answer them all, but hopefully you'll learn a lot more throughout the process of this summit. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Henry and Mary Jo, for that excellent introduction to the world of building retrofits and what they can do to improve the well-being of individuals and communities.
Okay, so thank you so much for joining us today, everyone. I was a little nervous to be presenting, but now I am just energized by the peer exchange session and by seeing everyone who is in the room and the passion that they're bringing into the room today. So I'm so excited that you're here. I want to frame a bit for everyone why we wanted to include this session today, and why it's so important to be focusing on this cross-sectoral engagement around affordable housing retrofit specifically. So the need for energy upgrades to affordable housing, both single family and multifamily, is huge. A 2021 International Energy Agency report projects that existing residential buildings need to be retrofitted at the rate of 2.5% each year to reach the goal of net zero emissions by 2050. According to a 2021 ACEEE report, this is 25 times the current rate of home retrofits completed through the leading US programs, Home Performance with Energy Star and the Weatherization Assistance Program. This is the third time you're seeing this slide today, so I'm going to ease on past it. So our goal is to get you all to start talking, or to talk more to each other across sectors and to better understand each other's motivations. To do that, we want to get a baseline of how connected you already are to different sectors. So please enter the following in the chat if you would. Name, pronouns, organization, location, what native land you're on, and the answer to the welcome question. Jasmine is going to paste in the example question or response right now in the chat, so you can see what this might look like. And the welcome question is, in the past 2 weeks, I have directly interacted with stakeholders from how many of the following sectors, not including my own sector? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Okay, and I encourage folks just to take a look at the chat. I know we've introduced ourselves already today, but hopefully just looking at what is the level of connection that folks already have. And I was disappointed in preparing my own answer that it wasn't higher when I thought just of the last 2 weeks. Whoever you are, or whomever you're representing, welcome. We are grateful that you've joined us, and it is so important to have you all in the room. So there is a tremendous opportunity right now to scale up energy upgrades in affordable housing, as we're seeing an unprecedented influx of new federal funding opportunities from COVID dollars, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and the Inflation Reduction Act. At the same time, we know that programs created or expanded without consultation, partnership, and co-leadership across sectors and without community will miss opportunities to target community priorities, meet owner and renter needs, and achieve multiple benefits, not just greenhouse gas emission reductions. With that in mind, here are our learning goals for today's session. Learn about people and entities with a potential role to play in scaling up energy retrofits of affordable housing, by which we mean public, subsidized, and unsubsidized housing. Begin to understand some motivations and potential partnership roles of various stakeholders, draw inspiration from examples of how stakeholders have successfully partnered together and addressed challenges, and identify 1 to 2 next steps in assembling a team to scale up retrofits in your community. So here's a brief outline of what we'll cover today. Please feel free to add your questions to the chat at any time. We will have someone monitoring the chat and collecting questions for the Q&A. Energy upgrade or retrofit programs are often designed without a broad cross-section of stakeholders and community at the table. As a result, they are often designed only with energy goals in mind. It may be difficult to achieve multiple benefits and policy objectives via these programs without including stakeholders from across multiple sectors in that program and policy design process. However, doing so can bring many benefits, for example, achieving multiple policy goals, decreasing greenhouse gas emissions, increasing housing and energy affordability, advancing racial equity, promoting economic inclusion and local workforce development, and improving health and safety. It can also help program planners incorporate valuable perspectives and leadership from groups that are traditionally excluded, such as community members, under-resourced households, renters, and just generally folks from sectors other than energy. It can also leverage input and lessons learned to overcome sector-specific barriers. It can lead to alignment with existing programs and help achieve economies of scale. Stakeholders collaborating on program design might be from different sectors within a state and/or local government, or they may reach across the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. For example, energy and housing departments might collaborate within a single city. A sustainability office might work with a state housing finance agency and a housing justice group, or a city department might partner with state energy office or a utility on enhancing weatherization delivery. Community engagement and leadership are essential components of collaborative strategy design. Stakeholder and community engagement can be important avenues for incorporating racial equity into the program development process and outcomes. We know that the burdens of high energy and housing costs and poor housing quality are not shared equally across different incomes and demographic groups. To quote from ACEEE's Energy Equity Initiative, committing to equity in clean energy programs, policies, and investments can improve and expand clean energy services and technologies for marginalized groups while creating more just processes, outcomes, and systems. Many groups have historically been underserved by energy efficiency and clean energy programs, including Black communities, Indigenous communities, people of color, low-income individuals, youth, older adults, recently arrived immigrants, those with limited English proficiency, and people with disabilities. And to this, I would add renters. I want to especially highlight the critical role played by having authentic leadership roles for frontline community-based organizations and leaders. Engaging and funding entities that are closest to frontline communities brings invaluable perspectives and insights into this work. Our community-driven planning training tomorrow will discuss how to build this priority into your processes and teams. So the next portion of this session covers 8 key stakeholder groups who can bring valuable insights in the development of programs to upgrade affordable housing. These groups are energy and sustainability departments within state and local government, community, both community-based organizations and community members, affordable housing owners, providers, and advocates, affordable housing funders and government agencies, whether state or local, low-income energy program administrators, health entities, economic inclusion stakeholders and workforce development providers, and energy or buildings experts and funders. The first group we're going to touch on only briefly because government energy and sustainability offices are not typically overlooked when folks think about clean energy programs. And in fact, they're often leading and setting the vision and goals for government clean energy and climate goals. There are various roles these entities can play. First, they may receive federal funding for clean energy initiatives, both from existing and new funding sources. Other agencies may also receive such funds. Second, they can launch or run or fund retrofit programs using federal or other dollars. We'll cover the Weatherization Assistance Program, which is federally funded and state-run later on in this session. They might focus on specific interventions or technologies that complement existing offerings by other entities. For example, other government agencies or utilities. This might come in the form of rebates, grants, or low, no interest loans. And as an example, the cities of Chicago, Minneapolis, and Cincinnati fund retrofit programs. Third, they can refer to or promote programs via existing touch points, for example, rental licensing, low-income home ownership programs, etc. Fourth, they can require and fund upgrades, sometimes as a condition of receiving funding or participating in certain government programs. Building energy performance standards would fall in this category. Though these policies are mandatory, it's important to note that affordable housing will often have trouble complying with these policies unless there is funding available to comply. But energy upgrade requirements can also be attached to voluntary programs or programs that are already funding building rehabilitation. These would generally be run out of a housing agency rather than an energy agency. Fifth, they should be creating accessible processes to bring in community leadership, including by shifting location, times, languages, etc., to accommodate community needs and or supporting community-led work. And these agencies may or may not have strong relationships with community. The second key group we'll cover is community. Here, we're specifically thinking about frontline, marginalized, and underserved communities. This includes community-based organizations such as environmental justice, social and racial justice, economic justice, tenant rights, and housing justice groups, community leaders of all types, community members, in particular, those who are historically underserved or who face barriers to participating in government processes, such as public hearings, comment opportunities, etc., and homeowners and renters with low incomes, including from both multifamily and single-family properties. Accountability and transparency are especially important for governments and others to consider when collaborating with community members and organizations in order to overcome challenging power dynamics and mistrust that unfortunately may exist. This means setting up structures to ensure that follow-through on commitments occurs, that there is clear communication about roles in the partnership and about how community feedback will be used, and that there is transparent reporting back on a local government's progress, no matter the degree of success. That transparency is really key. So here are some examples of motivations and needs of community stakeholders. These are just examples. Directing benefits to those most impacted by climate change and most left out historically by clean energy programs. Mitigating gentrification, displacement, and high housing and energy costs for households. Addressing urgent community priorities that may or may not be aligned with affordable housing retrofit programs. Protecting limited time and capacity. Having decision-making power alongside government actors and accountability from government actors. Developing local economies and contributing to wealth building, and receiving accessible, culturally relevant, clear information about what is being offered and what is possible from a partnership. For example, a list of options in terms of scale, capacity, timeline, etc., rather than asking open-ended questions like, what do you need? So that there's a better sense of how to work together and what role community could play. Community-based organizations' roles in developing energy upgrade programs can go far beyond providing input and gathering input. We'll dig more into this during tomorrow's community-driven planning session. ACEEE's 2021 report, Fostering Equity Through Community-Led Clean Energy Strategies, outlines the following potential roles for community-based organizations in clean energy efforts, which are participating in formal policy processes, developing accountability frameworks and having direct oversight, building community influence through partnerships and coalitions, delivering clean energy services, developing community-led workforce programs and trainings, and building longstanding capacity in communities for locally led clean energy efforts. Role mapping can be a valuable exercise. I'd like to share some insights from our strategic advisor, Climate Innovation. In role mapping, a government or other program administrator takes a look at all the roles needed to run a program. and assesses which roles they or consultants are doing well or not well. The goal is to ask, how might ownership be moved closer to the communities being targeted by the programs? Some of the roles or gaps identified might be better carried out by CBOs, and government can share resources to facilitate CBO efforts. In fact, it's important to note that each of these roles should be a funded role, since community partners bring valuable expertise, lived experience, and community connections to the table. Funding may range from stipends, food, and childcare to signed MOUs and contracts for larger amounts. Now I will turn things over to Callie from HRNA Advisors to talk about affordable housing stakeholders.
Thank you, Annika. You hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your time today. I'm Callie Seltzer. I'm a principal at HRNA Advisors, and I am coming to you today from Muncie and Lenape land. I'm in New York City today, based in DC. So a few things we want to talk about on the housing front. And for some of you who are not necessarily involved in housing as part of like your core mission or your work, we're just going to start with some basics, right? Like what housing types need energy upgrades? Well, in the places where we live, most. And you know, the real question is here, how do we work with housing partners to tackle energy upgrades that will lower utility bills, the goals that Annika mentioned, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, improve resident health, create quality jobs, and advance racial equity? So in short, how do we set and meet our climate and equity goals when so many of the barriers to energy retrofits are actually housing problems? We have a really complex housing ecosystem in the US, and we cannot really solve all of our housing problems with retrofits. I think you all know that kind of intuitively. Retrofits can help with affordability, but unfortunately, we can't retrofit our way out of all of our housing affordability crises. But when we look at this sort of graphic here, you know, the housing we're talking about, we're keeping a very open definition. So we've got all the housing where people who, you know, have a lower or moderate income level live, people who are perhaps more severely burdened by utility bills. We're also including in that your typical affordable housing that has a subsidy. So if there's a public housing or a subsidized housing or rent stabilized housing, and across these, we've got renter occupied, owner occupied, really the whole range of housing that exists in our cities and in our communities today. So what we want to do is to start to lay the groundwork through our collaborations on retrofits that will help us solve the increasingly complex set of housing and energy challenges over time. So it's all about how do we connect together as stakeholders to tackle some of the retrofits that actually set us up for longer and more lasting work together. So I'll move on to the next slide, please. So the government's very involved in housing. We're going to talk for a minute just about the levels of government here. This chart is a very short summary of various housing activities. As you know, federal government is very involved with major programs in housing, such as Section 8 and public housing, home, CDBG, a lot of COVID relief programs and stimulus programs. We really want to key in on your state housing finance agencies. They run a really important production program, if you will, called the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit. It's also a critical resource that comes from the state. Actually originally comes from Treasury, but through the states for rehab and renovations, and also potentially for retrofits. So if you're not already familiar with it, start to understand your HFA. They may not have energy goals, but there is a qualified allocation plan, and that's how they allocate money for substantial rehab of affordable housing, and they touch hundreds, thousands of units every year. Depending on the state you're in. And they also, implement a lot of affordable housing policy and other resources as well, and bonds, home block grants, state housing trust funds. There's a lot of motivation here at the state level, to maximize the number of low-income households that can be served through these public dollars. So think about your HFAs at the local level. Of course, localities are increasingly taking on the mantle of production and preservation of affordable housing. In part because there just aren't enough resources at the federal level to address the issues in our communities. So think about how your locality currently subsidizes or provides financing or programs for housing, and the critical connections that really need to be made between the state, the localities, and the federal government, and how do you start to braid these resources together to advance your retrofit programs? Next slide, please. Going to touch briefly on housing funders. This is, again, not an exhaustive list, but think about leverage. That's sort of the key here. What other resources are out there at the private level as well, not just government level, private level. So there's CDFIs who provide financing, technical assistance for affordable housing. They work directly with nonprofit developers. They're a critical part of the financing of a lot of affordable housing, new production, and also retrofits and preservation. And they have capital to deploy for low-income communities, and that's part of their mission, right? In a similar way, banks and lending institutions, and you can think of a CDFI in some ways as a nonprofit bank, but your kind of commercial banks and traditional lending institutions increasingly also have capital for meeting environmental sustainability and governance, if you will, ESG goals through ESG bonds. There's a lot of new money out there for banks and lending institutions. They want to be seen as leaders in the climate space. And not to skip over here, the other nonprofit organizations critical to the ecosystem because they are often the developer or the operator of the housing. And they are mission motivated. They exist to serve vulnerable populations and to support and remove barriers for lower income populations in their communities. So be thinking about how all of these funders and different private and public sector actors can contribute to the goals that you're trying to meet for your retrofits. And we'll just, I think, go to...
Kelly, I think you skipped over the owners slide. Did you want me to circle back to it?
Oh, sure. Yeah, let's go to owners. Thanks. So thinking about owners, that is, the person who pays the mortgage every month, not the rent, that would be your renter. Think about the entity that has the financial risk in the property because they built it and they built it or they own it now. It's their business line to own and operate it. You really have to talk to owners to design a program that they'll want to use, right? In so many ways, owners don't have incentives to aligned properly to do retrofits. So they won't necessarily want to partner with you on your retrofit projects, but you need to understand their motivations and make sure that we're designing programs that would entice them to partner. Otherwise, there will be no uptake of the program. You can't get incentives out the door. So you want to partner with them because you can leverage relationships there. You can design programs that are attractive and accommodate compliance constraints, and also think about how you integrate or coordinate with existing funding and financing timelines, as I mentioned earlier. And here on this side, we're just showing kind of the basic breakdown of what is the difference between a housing owner and a property manager. So critical to know who the property managers are and essentially who understands the day-to-day inner workings of the building, like who knows what's leaking and where, which windows are drafty, and really understands where retrofits could be a benefit for residents and for ultimately the financing of the project as well. Thanks, Annika. We'll go to the check-in question. So, and again, we'll just respond to this in the chat. But after hearing about different community and affordable housing stakeholders, thinking about who your currently coordinating with. What is one new way that you'd like to explore engaging with these partners? So for example, is there a new question that today's conversation has raised for you? A partnership role that you feel like you're positioned to take on that you haven't, explored before, perhaps a new approach, or hey, I think I should actually talk to my city housing department, or someone that you haven't spoken with that you think you need to connect with. Thank you. Seeing some ideas come in the chat. Yes, healthy materials, community health. Thank you. Great responses, and we're cataloging the chat. You can save the chat by clicking the 3 dots. And with that, I will pass it back to Annika and keep those responses coming. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Kelly. Our next stakeholder group is low-income energy program administrators, and I'm going to focus on just 3 types. The first 2 are administrators of the Weatherization Assistance Program and the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program. Both are federally funded programs administered by state agencies, though often not the same state agency. Weatherization reduces energy costs for households with low incomes by increasing the energy efficiency of homes or apartments. The Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, or LIHEAP, addresses energy bill shortfalls and emergencies through bill payment assistance. The third type is utility energy efficiency programs, which are typically administered by utilities, but can also be run by a state agency using utility funds. So why might you want to engage these program administrators? In the case of LIHEAP, there may be the opportunity to receive referrals to past or current program participants, or to gain insight into communities experiencing high need. Also, both weatherization and LIHEAP are often implemented by community action agencies, which can have deeper ties to community that can be leveraged. In the case of weatherization and utility programs, there may be an opportunity to achieve economies of scale by piggybacking on existing offerings. And these programs may have gaps that administrators would be eager for partners to fill. Programs may have limitations in what they can or choose to include in their programs. As an example, weatherization must spend its entire federal allocation on an annual timeline, including a recent massive federal cash influx. Despite this cash influx, federal rules mean that agencies can only spend a certain amount per home, meaning that a weatherization administrator or local implementer still has to leverage outside funding if they want to undertake more comprehensive upgrades. Rising construction costs also limit how deep a retrofit can go under existing spending caps. And weatherization turns away many homes, at least initially, because they are not able to allocate enough of their funding for the health and safety needs present in homes, which must be dealt with before weatherization work can occur. Lastly, many community action agencies focus their efforts on 1 to 4 unit properties, or even just on single family homes, even though properties of 5 or more units are also eligible for upgrades. These 3 limitations or gaps, which are comprehensiveness, health and safety, and 5+ multifamily buildings, present potential opportunities for partnership, among others. It's worth talking with your state weatherization administrator or local implementer to see what opportunities they see. For utility programs, utilities may have state-imposed constraints, such as cost-effectiveness tests or self-imposed constraints that result in gaps in their programs. These might include not serving particular building types, for example, only single family or only master metered buildings, only offering quick payback measures such as light bulbs and faucet aerators, so no comprehensive or deep treatment of buildings, or not offering electrification measures such as air source heat pumps or heat pump water heaters. It's worth talking to utility program administrators to understand what gaps exist, and to their program implementers, which are typically third parties, to understand opportunities for filling these gaps with new offerings. Community stakeholders and interveners in public utility commission proceedings, for example, clean energy advocates, or even public utility commission staff, can be another good source to learn about utility program gaps and shortcomings. Next up, health entities. The home environment can have a profound influence on health and well-being. Residential retrofits that improve energy efficiency can also make homes safer and healthier, especially when such measures correct indoor air quality issues. Vulnerable populations are especially susceptible to in-home health and safety hazards. Specifically, building upgrades can reduce exposure to mold, moisture, and lead, improve indoor air quality, lower risk of gas leaks or explosions, reduce emergency room visits and missed days of work and school related to asthma and other respiratory diseases, improve mental health, and reduce the thermal stress of extreme heat and cold. There are a variety of health entities working to improve public health and reduce healthcare costs who may be interested in partnering on programs to improve energy efficiency in homes in a way that also improves occupant health. As you can see here, health entities provide a variety of services, and many are also motivated to reduce healthcare costs, which can sometimes be achieved by home upgrades. Some entities are already running healthy home programs that seek to remove asthma triggers and lead hazards from homes. These may be municipal, nonprofit, or private. So health initiatives and healthy homes programs may also present opportunities to piggyback on existing efforts, and we've borrowed and adapted this chart. Homes with health hazards are often inefficient as well. And there are some key measures that can improve both health and energy efficiency simultaneously. For example, replacing failing gas equipment. There's others. Another type of intervention might be repairing a hole in the roof where moisture is intruding and then installing insulation in the newly dry attic or walls. On this slide are some examples of health programs that present potential partnership opportunities. And in these examples, funding comes from the federal level and is then administered locally. We see examples where entities are running in-home lead abatement programs, working to modify homes to remove asthma triggers, working to reduce federal healthcare spending via clean energy upgrades, etc. It may be worth talking to health entities in your area to understand the types of in-home health and safety hazards they're most concerned about, to access their health data, and to discuss the potential for partnership. The next category is economic inclusion and workforce stakeholders. We'll use our partner Emerald Cities Collaborative's definition of economic inclusion. Economic inclusion goes beyond workforce development. It includes high road employment and contracting opportunities and improved access to those opportunities for historically marginalized people and communities, i.e. BIPOC, women, at-risk youth, etc. The high road employment part of this is what is traditionally referred to as workforce development and refers specifically to individuals. There's also a business support ecosystem that works with contractors and businesses. And high road here refers to policies that encourage competition based on quality rather than cost, and favors firms that internalize the true costs of business by providing good wages, benefits, growth opportunities, and working conditions, adhering to laws and regulations, and pursuing best practices with respect to community engagement and the environment. Who are the key stakeholders in this category? In this case, we're looking across both workforce and business development. So we have community colleges and universities that can offer training, supply contractors or students for the workforce. Universities may operate weatherization training centers. There are city or county workforce development agencies that may run programs for incumbent workers to upskill or provide services like case management or job placement to opportunity youth who are low-income 16 to 24-year-olds who have left high school or are underemployed. There are also Youth Build or Job Corps program administrators. These are programs for opportunity youth funded by the U.S. Department of Labor. Youth Build primarily builds homes for low-income households. There are 273 Youth Build programs across the country. Youth Build administrators may be CBOs or any of the entities I just named. Job Corps administrators may be nonprofit or for-profit entities running one of over 121 Job Corps centers across the country. In terms of the business support ecosystem, you have apprenticeship program administrators such as unions, labor management organizations, etc. Small business development centers that are locally administered centers funded by the Small Business Administration, providing technical assistance, coaching, and access to loans. And business associations and chambers of commerce, including minority business enterprise, women business enterprise, and specific ethnic business associations, and specialized chambers of commerce, for example, the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Why should you reach out to workforce and business development stakeholders? Again, some wisdom from our partner Emerald Cities Collaborative. Climate actions such as building retrofits result in demand for certain types of goods and services. These are economic opportunities, but details really matter. So how retrofits are implemented will influence whether economic outcomes are high road and equitable. These efforts will either reinforce existing economic disparities or change them. And without intentionally working to correct for inequities, retrofit projects will tend to be part of a larger system that will inadvertently perpetuate inequities by reinforcing exclusion, low road jobs, and wealth disparities. Focusing on economic inclusion can help align retrofit work with other priorities within a jurisdiction, including economic recovery, racial equity, and repairing harm from government actions. Partnership might look a lot of different ways. Retrofit projects can create community benefits, such as opportunities for local workers and for businesses located within or connected to disadvantaged communities. Partnerships can establish community benefits agreements with the community, set targets and require reporting on hiring workers from disadvantaged communities, create opportunities for workers or those who have been left out of the labor force to receive training, and leverage retrofit projects for on-the-job training or other work-based learning. So on to energy and building experts and funders. These are the types of folks you may already be used to working with for clean energy projects. So this includes technical experts who can advise on building needs, program design, appropriate technologies, costs, and benefits. This can include how to ensure that electrification results in stable or lower bills for low-income residents rather than higher bills, for example. Energy service companies operate performance-based programs and can manage and finance large upgrade projects. Clean energy advocacy organizations are often familiar with gaps and shortcomings of existing programs, new and emerging models, and best practices in the field. Green banks, where they exist, not everywhere, can combine public and private funds to speed adoption of commercially available technologies. And implementers of on-bill programs can offer energy upgrades to a utility customer at no or reduced upfront cost, with repayment tied to the customer's utility bill or meter. Now I will turn things over to Dee Morales to share some case studies of collaboration across some of these sectors and with community.
Great, thanks, Annika. So in these next few slides, I'll be talking about some case studies of collaboration across different stakeholders we've already discussed. So the first one on the list is DC's Affordable Housing Retrofit Accelerator Program, which is an example of city government working with affordable housing stakeholders. The city engaged a roundtable of affordable housing owners and nonprofits to develop recommendations on how to design building energy performance standard rules that make compliance feasible for affordable housing. The Minneapolis 4D program is an example of working across local government departments. The city collaborated across economic development and sustainability departments on the 4D program, which proved to be a successful strategy for collaborating to both preserve affordable housing and provide energy incentives. Providence, Rhode Island provides an example of frontline communities and leadership roles for developing the city's climate action plan through the Racial and Environmental Justice Committee, which integrates the concerns and needs of marginalized communities into the city's sustainability work and decision-making processes. Milwaukee's home-funded rental rehabilitation loan program is an example of an ongoing process involving collaboration between community leaders and city government staff. The program was largely developed by city government staff and informed by some consultation with community-based organizations, small property developers, and lenders. Next slide, please. So this next case study is based on a blog post by Slipstream, which is an energy efficiency nonprofit, where they shared honest reflections on collaborating with a local CBO and a utility on a pilot project aimed at low-income households. And we'd like to take a moment to commend Slipstream on this type of honest reflection, where they show that collaboration and partnerships are not always easy. And so some of the lessons learned from this case study are that breaking commitment to community breaks community trust and undermines CBOs. So in this instance, when the utility changed program offerings without any sort of explanation, this broke trust with their partners, the CBOs, and the communities that it was trying to target. The next is that making assumptions about community needs and carrying forward with assumptions without asking any questions is a clear sign of problematic power dynamics. It's important to know that communities often know their own solutions. And the last lesson that we highlight here is to trust community-based partners to course correct with you and maybe even prove you wrong. In the case study, both Slipstream and the utility had to learn to get comfortable taking a back seat, which is not always easy. And there's, of course, a lot more to say here, but we'll be touching more on collaboration with CBOs in the panel after the break, so please stay tuned for that. And I believe the next slide is over to Annika.
Great, thanks, Steve. We've thrown a lot of information at you. What can partnerships among these entities look like? Say you want to create a program that works for subsidized affordable housing, then partners like the State Housing Finance Agency, local affordable housing developers, and CDFIs might be key. On the other hand, if you want a program that fills health and safety gaps in the weatherization assistance program, then the state energy office, local community action agencies, the city health department, environmental justice organizers, and even a local health provider might be the right fit. For a program that seeks to fill workforce gaps and serve unsubsidized housing, you might work with your city's housing department, a local affordable housing advocacy group, a tenant rights organization, and your local community college, for example. These are just hypothetical scenarios, and there are many permutations of local stakeholders who could help your department or organization accurately assess the highest priority issues and the most promising solutions to address them. So for our check-in question, given the priorities, needs, and/or gaps in your community, which stakeholder who is not at the table is it most important to bring to the table? If you don't know the highest priorities, greatest needs, or biggest program gaps in your community, consider that community might be your answer that you would put in the chat. So please go ahead and put your answers in the chat. Okay, I look forward to seeing what comes in and reflecting on what people have shared. Please take a look at what your peers are sharing here. So Dee is now going to bring us home with our last topic, potential next steps to engage with community and across sectors.
Great, thank you. So one of the potential next steps we'd like to highlight is called ecosystems mapping. And this slide is from the perspective of a government agency needs, such as an energy or sustainability agency. So one of the first steps in ecosystem mapping is to secure participation from other government agencies and identify trusted CBOs that are working on issues like climate change, climate resilience planning, environmental justice, anti-displacement, and energy affordability, to name a few on the list. The partners that you'd like to partner with should be aligned, accountable, connected, and have the capacity to collaborate long-term. So to start doing this work, you might want to start doing some research on potential partners online or through your own networks. Once you've identified some potential partners, you can meet with 1 to 3 potential CBOs, select your partners, and provide compensation to CBOs for the expertise that they bring. And a very important step in this process is to find time to develop a plan for power sharing and decision-making processes with your CBO partners. And the resource that is listed in the slide is an ecosystem mapping process guide, which includes criteria on how you would select a CBO partner. So if you have more detailed questions or want to find more detail, please find you can find it in this resource here. Next slide, please. So one of the next steps that you can start taking is to start engaging stakeholders in conversations. And this work takes time, so it's best to start immediately. And so to start stakeholder conversations, much like we've already mentioned, identify trusted entities that are already doing some of the work that you're interested in partnering around. Reach out to the stakeholder types listed in this presentation and try to understand and find alignment with your stakeholders' needs, motivations, and current programming, as well as identifying challenges that you and your partners that you might encounter along the way. Next slide, please. And last but not least, we'd also like to highlight the importance of starting to do community engagement as an important next step, and note that not all the different types and ways to do community engagement are equally impactful. So the spectrum that you see here is called the spectrum of community engagement to ownership, and it's both a self-assessment tool and a planning tool created by Facilitating Power. So you might need it as one or both. And more impactful community engagement starts to happen toward the right of the spectrum at 3, 4, and 5. And so voice elevates the needs and assets of communities into processes and planning. Delegated power increases the capacity of communities to play leadership roles and in making decisions. And community ownership fosters democratic participation and bridges the divide between community and governance. So on the spectrum, you might be at a 3 and want to improve, but not be able to move up to 4 or 5 until you have more things in place, like resources, removal of constraint, increased staff support, or trying to find ways to increase the capacity of the community to participate in some of these activities. So the concept of community planning, community-driven planning will be covered in a separate webinar tomorrow. There's obviously a lot to cover here, so please join us tomorrow afternoon for some more detail on this. And over to you, Annika. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. As we wrap up, I wanted to reshare the learning goals and takeaways for today's session. We'll be asking for your feedback in a post-summit survey. Please let us know how we can improve this presentation and other sessions to better help you reach these learning goals. Lastly, here are links to resources we shared, mentioned, or drew on during this presentation. You'll be able to access these links once we post the presentations online in the next week or so. Thank you for being here today. And thanks to our partners and our strategic advisor, Climate Innovation. And of course, also thanks to our funders. Thank you.
Thank you, Annika, Dee, and Kelly. We will now get into some questions from the audience. And just as a reminder, if you have a question that you'd like to ask, please submit it in the chat, and we'll have someone going through all the questions to ensure that we get through as many as possible. So I'll get started and jump into some questions that were asked at the beginning. Manufactured homes and mobile homes tend to house LMI populations and have horrid energy efficiency issues, yet many of the considerations for upgrades don't fit these homes. Do the new incentives affect these types of homes?
Stephanie, you may be disappointed in my answer, which is that I think you're the person best situated to answer this question. I will say it varies among utilities, for example, whether their programs apply to manufactured homes. Certainly these homes are in need of upgrades. Do you have thoughts, Stephanie, on the new federal funding?
So I know that a lot of the new federal funding has been pretty open, and when it comes to ARPA funds, there are different uses, and the federal government has made sure to keep the rules rather open. And so this is the ARPA state and local funding, and a lot of the IRA funding is still being developed, so I can't necessarily answer as to whether manufactured homes are being included in that as well. Anyone else want to chime in before we go on to the next question?
I would just add I would just add that it's worth thinking about sort of the underlying structure of manufactured housing ownership and how do we create opportunities for people to own the land out from under their homes. And there's a lot of great organizations like Rock USA that do that. And in tandem, they get to control for, their physical units and upgrade their units accordingly, not always relying on a corporate owner. So.
Thanks. Would you explain what the initials for CDFI stand for?
I can do that. Sure. So it's Community Development Financial Institution. And if you look up the CDFI fund on the Department of Treasury, you'll find information about what CDFIs are, what they do, who they fund. But essentially, they operate like a bank to fund communities and projects that traditional banks consider too risky.
Thanks, Callie. How does one motivate affordable housing funding agencies to prioritize, evaluate, or verify energy efficiency goals?
I think this is really tough. It really varies across agencies, whether they're already motivated to prioritize energy efficiency goals. And there's a great resource by Dana Bartlemay from when she was at the National Housing Trust that goes through state by state, how housing finance agencies in particular are prioritizing energy efficiency within their funding decisions. I would say it's a matter of shifting the emphasis from upfront costs to ongoing operating costs. I think there's an overemphasis right now on upfront costs, and new types of accounting are needed to encourage these agencies to focus on the ways that energy efficiency has positive financial benefits in the long term. Callie, did you have anything you want to add?
That's good.
That's good.
Okay, we have another question. How do you suggest starting community engagement with LMI folks when there are competing priorities for folks such as trouble paying bills, rent, and other issues? How do you suggest taking folks from survival mode to engagement?
I think that's a really great question that may be answered in the CBO panel that's coming up next, since these folks have had a lot of experience with these sorts of grappling with these sorts of questions.
I mean, I think one key thing is that we can't expect free work from folks who are already extremely constrained, dealing with competing priorities and trying to put out fires in their community. Right. So we need to be resourcing feedback and other types of work, ranging all the way up to signing MOUs and contracts when we're engaging with low and moderate income folks. Their expertise is real and it should be valued.
So I think we have time for one more question before we wrap up. And that will be, how can manufacturers of clean energy products get more involved with community programs and government initiatives to directly address the needs being discussed here?
It's a question I haven't thought a lot about. I think get in touch with your local community. I think so much of this starts from conversations and from understanding what the needs are, and really just opening up the avenues of communication to understand what the opportunities are. Callie, do you have other thoughts to add?
I would just add that, similar to what we've said earlier about how most utility programs for retrofits are best suited to market rate. A lot of products that are out there also are best suited to market rate. And we really need to push the non-market rate agenda with these manufacturers, and they help them see the market that exists for their products and the partners that are coming together to use these technologies.
So I think we can do one more question, and I see that Steve Gelb has his hand up. So if we can unmute him, and then that'll be our final question or comment.
Yeah, I didn't have a question. I wanted to help answer the last question about manufacturers. I'm Steve Gelb with Emerald Cities Collaborative. They can play a key role in training and development. So they do a lot of workforce training, and you can get manufacturers involved with aligning with training programs that train HVAC technicians and weatherization and so on. Also supporting especially minority contractors to be engaged in the industry. So I just wanted to add that. But maybe you have time for another question since I answered that quickly.
So I think we're going to transition over to our break. That's all the time we have for Q&A. Thanks again to our speakers, Annika, Dee, and Callie. We've got a 10-minute break now, and we will see you back here for our final session, our panel of 5 amazing community-based organizations. So please be back at 2:50 p.m. Eastern. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. I hope that you're as excited as I am about our final session for today. Meeting this moment, how community organizations are mobilizing collaborative housing and energy solutions, a panel of 5 community-based organizations from across the country making very real impacts in the communities they serve. I'll turn it over to Alexis Washburn of Emerald Cities Collaborative, who will be the moderator for this panel, to introduce herself and the panelists. Welcome, Alexis.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for that introduction. My name is Alexis Washburn. Oh, can everyone hear me okay? Thanks, I'm off mute. So if you can't hear me, just let me know. But my name is Alexis Washburn, and I'm the Northeast Regional Director at Emerald Cities Collaborative, and I'm really excited to kick off this panel where we get to hear directly from folks at community-based organizations who are actively involved in this work. And so next slide, Mandy, please. And so our goal for folks attending today is outlined on this slide. And we hope that by participating today, you'll walk away feeling empowered to apply lessons learned from the highlighted community-driven retrofit efforts to your own context, discuss types of systemic, structural, and historical oppression that cause the need for community-driven retrofit programs, identify a variety of approaches and methods for establishing and growing community-driven retrofit programs, as well as recognizing the challenges and best practices for community-driven programs and campaigns for residential retrofits in underserved and marginalized communities. And so next slide, please. So we're going to start off with a poll question to get a better sense of the audience. So I welcome you all to participate in this question while I briefly introduce our panelists. And so joining us today from the Community Development Corporation of Pembroke and Hopkins Park, we have Jahari Cole-Quelly and Lee Ringo. From Community Action Network, we have Derek Miller. And from Push Green, we have Lou DeJesus. From Power Interfaith, we have Amani Reed. And from Project Empower, we have Nkwanda Jah. And so from these brief introductions, I'll also dive in and let the panelists introduce themselves in more detail. But just to take a moment to sort of recognize the folks that are in this room. So the poll question was, which best describes your organization or work? And so it looks like we have a good percentage of people representing government. So this is a great opportunity to hear directly from community-based organizations on the projects that they're implementing. And we also have a good representation also from community-based organizations that are already doing retrofit work and those that are interested in doing retrofit work. So hopefully there's some lessons to be learned here. I'm really excited to share more. And so I'm going to transition next to our panelists to let them introduce themselves in more detail. And so each panelist will have 5 minutes to introduce themselves and talk about their work. And just to make sure that we have enough time for Q&A at the end, I'll give you guys a little notice when you're close to your 5 minutes. But while you introduce yourself, please address these 3 points: who you are, where you're doing your work, and who your community is. and examples of your projects and approach. So including how you began and your approach to working on upgrades in homes, buildings in your community. And so I will transition over first to the Community Development Corporation of Pembroke and Hopkins Park.
Hi, everyone. My name is Johari Cole-Qualey, and I am the current president and the managing director of the Community Development Corporation of Pembroke and Hopkins Park, which we affectionately call the CDC. And we're an organization, a nonprofit organization of community volunteers that formed nearly since 2018, that we formed into a charitable organization, but we've been working together as volunteers, as a task force, handling different situations and issues that came up in our community that we wanted to address and that we felt passionate about, and we wanted to do something about it. So we became basically a community action group and back in 2014, 2015, and we really worked well together and decided to continue as a charitable organization since. Since then, we've had a lot of success with developing youth programs, as well as working with conservation groups in our community. We have an area that is ecologically rich and very rare of its kind, and so it's globally significant. And so we work with a lot of conservation groups in our community. Our community is historically an African-American community of about 150 years. We're going on a, 150-year anniversary coming up very soon. And we have been very successful in terms of traditional legacies and trying to maintain our legacies. And this is one of the things our community organization focused on. When we were approached by several folks in clean energy work who heard our plea over 10, 15 years ago for clean energy solutions and to address our energy burdens that we have. We're currently about 80% of our constituents in our community are on propane, between propane gas as well as wood burning stoves and electric. So between those three, makes up the main energy dependency that our community deals with. Recently, our community has been rewarded a natural gas pipeline in our community. And it spurred some controversy, it spurred some question marks and some cheers. So we've had a mixed bag of how it was perceived and received in our community. As a matter of fact, the groundbreaking is coming up in another week. But the community recently, within even this year, this past year, had a poll where majority of the people in our community, a resounding 60–70% of them, said they wanted clean energy solutions. Fortunately, before we even knew the breadth of the sentiment in our community, our organization was approached by our partners with Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition, as well as RMI and Fresh Energy, to assist us with developing a clean energy solution. So we've been fortunate to work with some very excellent partners at developing this plan of action to give our community a choice. Is the primary goal of ours, is to give our community a choice, a clean energy choice, and to address a lot of the energy issues going on. One of the things we found, and my cohort and partner, Lee Ringo, will address that very shortly, was a lot of because due to a lot of redlining, traditional, malpractices, I call them, against communities of color, we've had to deal with a lot of things like neglect, redlining in our community, where a lot of the homes suffered and are in debilitated conditions because they were not able to, many of our residents were not able to afford to redo their roofs or do typical maintenance and updates on our homes. So this posed a lot of issues that we found and that Lee is going to be addressing a little bit later. But our community program, our PEEP, which we call it the Pembroke Energy Efficiency Pilot, we're really proud that we've completed our construction. We worked with several residents, completed construction phases. And as you see in this picture, one of our residents are very, very happy. So we're going to, I'm going to turn it over to Lee for him to continue to speak on some of those, the things that we found in our community, but we've had a successful program and now we're moving into phase PEEP 2.0. And that's what we're planning on now. Thank you.
Hey everyone, good afternoon. My name is Lee Ringo. I'm the current Energy Efficiency Program Manager, working closely with the thriving Community Development Corporation of Pembroke and Hopkins Park. I started this off as a project manager for the PEEP program. I had transitioned from operations to project management, and I seen the opportunity to work in Pembroke, where my mother grew up, so in a community that I'm very close to. So beginning of May 2021, I connected with the CDC and they gave me the rundown of what they were looking to do, which was to introduce a clean energy movement in rural America. This is a community, some of you may already know, history of, disenfranchisement, underserved, just a lot going on. And then, like, as Jahari pointed out, the gas line. It's been a great project. Like, Jahari mentioned, we just wrapped up construction. It's been a long time coming. We did 4 homes in this project, in this pilot, sorry. And now we're looking to expand it because what we did was we found a successful way to do this. And I'm looking forward to sharing those experiences and also learning more myself here. So definitely glad to be here and looking forward to share some insight that I have.
Thank you so much, Jahari and Leo. It's great to hear from you. I'm going to pass it over now to Derek from Community Action Network.
Thank you, everybody. So Derek Miller, Executive Director at Community Action Network. So CAN, we're based in Washtenaw County in Michigan. We have 7 community centers sprinkled throughout the area, and we are primarily serving under-resourced neighborhoods as well. And it's a mixture of the types of communities that we work with. So for example, 3 of the locations are affordable housing subsidized communities. One is a cooperative, another one is a naturally occurring under-resourced unsubsidized community, and we're also working with a school community located in a rural area as well. And so in the city of Ann Arbor, they actually launched an A20 initiative roughly about 3 years ago. And I had CAN get signed up immediately, and largely because I'm always recognizing that under-resourced families are underrepresented when it comes to things that affect climate change and solutions and things like that. And so I wanted to really bring that to the forefront. And so fast forwarding over the years and a lot of kind of that coalition building with the city of Ann Arbor, specifically the Office of Sustainability and Innovations, we decided to try to decarbonize a neighborhood. And one of CAN's communities, the Bryant neighborhood, which is roughly 262 single ranch style homes located in the south area of Ann Arbor. It was originally developed in the early 70s, actually with some HUD funding intended to be a kind of starter home kind of community as well. It's roughly about a little over 50% BIPOC community and a mixture of about 50% home-owned versus 50% renters. And we wanted that complexity in our project because the city of Ann Arbor has a broader goal of the city itself being carbon neutral by 2030. And we have to start somewhere. And so fast forwarding in this particular type of project, myself and eventually landed some seed funding from the McKnight Foundation to be able to start doing some pretty intensive work with the community and starting to really get a better understanding of not only the different types of health and comfort needs, but what is it truly going to take to fully decarbonize this particular community. And so through that process, we were able to hire some staff, fortunately also residents from within the community. And we were able to really get a full understanding of the needs of the community, but also what it will take to fully have it decarbonized. So for example, we worked with a local solar company that did a complete assessment of the community to know not only what is the full solar potential, but also even in the context. So just as a quick anecdote, in Michigan, there is a law that prevents residential and commercial properties from producing more power than what they consume. And so which is really detrimental in terms of households that could truly be overproducing in terms of clean energy, but are not allowed to do so. And so we have the city had found a way essentially around that by establishing what's called a sustainable energy utility, which is currently still looking at being able to establish that, and it would be able to circumvent that. And so when we did that full solar assessment through the community, we ran with that assumption that we did not have that limitation. And there was a whole ranking process too, in terms of high potential to low potential, what the production would look like, even down to the level of detail of what the arrays, arrangement, costs, and output and things of that nature. And so for every little area of this particular project, we've been documenting what it would take to fully have it decarbonized, because it also is a community powered by natural gas for its stoves typically and ovens, but also for its water heaters and furnaces. And so we have landed some initial funds to start to not only do the appliance retrofitting for further rectification for energy-based or electrical-based type of appliances, but also doing a lot of things that improve the health and comfort of the community. It is also documented as a pretty low air quality. It is right next to the expressway as well, and it has a lot of other particular types of health challenges, including a drainage issue, a historical drainage issue that is we have documented through our organization, causing some abnormally high respiratory illness rates within this community. So it really just hits all of the kind of core areas of what it takes to, or of a community that really could benefit from some strong willpower from the private and public sector to help decarbonize it altogether.
Thank you so much, Derek, and thank you for seeing my time check. It's really hard, I think, to introduce all the great work that these organizations are doing in 5 minutes. So I'm excited for the Q&A portion where we can have more of a discussion. And so now I'm going to push it over to Lou DeJesus from Push Green.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having us, Push Green, take part in this event. 523 people here, that is awesome. So Push Green began as kind of an outshoot of the activism and organizing work done by Push Buffalo, which is People United for Sustainable Housing, based in Western New York. The offices are in Buffalo, New York on the west side. And so Push Buffalo started by becoming involved in affordable housing, but really remaining like acutely aware that that was not going to be all that was needed to solve the problem of energy equity in the area. Buffalo in particular is well known for being one of the top either 3 or 4 segregated cities in the country at this point. So Push Buffalo began campaigns, in particular the National Fuel Gas Campaign, which worked very hard with many other groups to have National Fuel and other corporations that were engaged in, I'm sorry, I'm getting very distracted by the chat, interesting chat. Corporations that were involved in using fossil fuels, which are detrimental to communities in terms of not only affordability, but in terms of the climate. And out of that organizing work, the Green Jobs, Green New York Act was passed, and this was in October of 2009. So what this act did was enable New Yorkers across the state to receive reduced or no-cost energy audits residentially. There were investments in energy efficiency work for LMI New Yorkers. at one point even no-cost energy audits for small businesses and nonprofits. So a lot of wonderful things came out of that act. And one of those was Push Green, which is kind of Push Buffalo's little sister. And what we do at this stage in this iteration of Push Green is we work across 5 counties in Western New York to do energy outreach and education, primarily in LMI communities, help New Yorkers access those no-cost energy audits residentially, and then help New Yorkers learn about opportunities for energy efficiency retrofits. We also are very big still in engaging in other ways to protect New Yorkers, such as tenants' rights, housing justice, and seeing that as being all a part of creating the strong, sustainable communities across Western New York. Again, my name is Lou DeJesus, and I am a community energy advisor with Push Green. I've worked with them for about 9 years now, and had the pleasure of starting in Push Green's 2nd year as a program assistant and helping to develop a lot of the systems that are still in place now. I think it's safe to announce at this point that we're also going to be involved in a really, really exciting new approach that New York State is taking towards energy efficiency, which will be regional energy hubs. So we haven't had a soft launch yet. Stay tuned, take down our email so you can join us in celebrating that. But what we're hoping to do is really kind of concentrate our effort on the most important aspects of green energy for typically oppressed communities. Workforce development, I would say, is one in particular, and then educating folks in the opportunities for clean energy. And I see I have my warning sign, so I'll stop right there. And thank you again so much.
Thank you so much, Lou, for sharing. We're going to transition now over to Power Interfaith and hear from Amani Reed.
Thank you, Alexis. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amani Reed. I use she, her pronouns. I'm 26 years old and I'm a Temple University alumni living in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I got involved in this climate and environmental justice work because I was concerned about the injustices that I was seeing in my community, like dirty water, pollution, and housing. And I wanted to make a change for now and for the future. I believe that we need community participation in creating solutions, and we need to have a voice from the front lines up. I'm currently a climate justice organizer for Power Interfaith. We're a locally rooted organizing force fighting for racial and economic justice on a livable planet, and we value the common spiritual energy that underlies our humanity. We lift up the inherent dignity of every person, and we're rooted in shared faith and ethics, uniting diverse congregations and ethical organizations across the state. We want to live in a world where all of us, no matter what color, are in balance with each other and our shared earth. And I joined organizers and partners last year across the state to include housing, energy advocates, organizations, Pennsylvania residents, and state legislators for the successful win of $125 million to create the Whole Home Repairs Program for Pennsylvania. This was passed late July and was introduced by Pennsylvania State Senator Nikhil Saval. You'll see a picture on the screen of one of our campaign launches where we were educating and, kind of building that power and support around the whole home repairs. This program establishes a one-stop shop for home repairs and weatherization while building out our local workforce and adding new family-sustaining jobs in a growing field. And this program is the first in its kind in the nation. So we're looking for Pennsylvania residents all across the state to stay warm, safe, and dry in homes they can afford and getting the repairs that they need. This program works by doing 3 things. It provides up to $50,000 to repair, update, and adapt homes throughout Pennsylvania. It funds support staff to help people across the state with the assistance they need. And it also offers funding and training programs. along with stipends for trainees to build up the local workforce in our state and meet that demand. The whole home repairs meets the real needs of our constituents. It's a direct investment into our people and our homes. And this was a long-term victory because we had to start by electing a climate justice champion, then sitting at the table with him to co-draft the plan for safe housing, green jobs, and affordable energy. Then Power and our partners organized across the state to push for getting that funding, $125 million, into the state budget for the whole home repairs. And we're so excited to win these resources for low, moderate income, and disproportionately impacted communities in our state. These victories are deeply rooted, long haul projects, and now we need to sustain and fund and expand the program, which we're currently doing. We worked with Senator Sabal office yesterday even for a call-in day to our new governor, Josh Shapiro. This week was his first week in office, and we did support by calling in and thanking him for his previous support of the whole home repairs. And we also want him to include this into his year's budget and into this year's budget negotiations for the state. And he actually has a budget address on March 7th. So we called in this week and actually called the governor's office and thanked them. We also called members across the state and urged them to call the office as well. And another really great campaign we're working on and I'm leading is the People's Energy Campaign. It focuses on clean energy and renewable energy for homes. And for me, I've been really worried about the increasing energy bills and electric and gas bills that our community is seeing and many people cannot afford. And I want to see elected officials in our state put our communities first, put our health and safety first, and use profits for our community and not for fossil fuel industries. Right now, PECO is Pennsylvania's largest electric utility company, and they deliver power to 1.7 million of our consumers and more than 545,000 natural gas customers in southeastern Pennsylvania. It's regulated by the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission, and they are currently prioritizing fossil fuel industries. We want the Public Utility Commission to listen to the community stories and their needs, meet our demands, and invest in environmental solutions. So right now, we're creating a grassroots People's Energy Plan or a green energy plan, and we're drawing on the experiences of Power's diverse membership all across the state to create a vision for this electrical service that is clean and something that we collectively need for our state. And I'm excited to talk to you guys more about that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Imani. And then now to our last but not least panelists, we'll switch over to Nkwanda Jah from Project Empower. If you're speaking in Nkwanda, we can't hear you yet. You'll have to come off mute.
Okay, sorry.
We can hear you.
Thank you. And so glad to be a part of this wonderful panel. My name is Nkwanda Jah. I am in Gainesville, Florida. That's North Florida, and we're inland. I am the chair. I'm the executive director of Cultural Arts Coalition, where I've been doing environmental education with teens for over 30 years. I also chair the Environmental and Climate Justice Committee of the NAACP. I've been doing that about 5 years now, and we have done community forums at least once a year. In the fall of 2021, we sponsored, along with other organizations, a forum about moving towards 100% clean energy. At that forum, it was across the county, so there was representation from residents, from farmers, from elected officials, from the staff of our municipalities. There were environmental organizations that were represented, and it was a really good event. And one thing that the top thing that came out of it was that if we wanted to move towards 100% energy, clean energy, there were some things we needed to do before we could get there. Out of that group, we were informed about a grant opportunity for technical assistance from the Department of Energy. We applied, we put together a team from community organizations and Alachua County administrators, as well as the city of Gainesville administrators, and submitted that grant. We were one of 24 organizations across the country who received the technical assistance grant, and we were the only organization in the state of Florida that received that grant, and it was for our project empowerment, which is, it's a mouthful, energy modernization for people, opportunities, work, equity, and renewables. We started working together to talk about weatherization, because if we were continuing to lose energy in these homes, and the homes that we were really identifying in our grant were three neighborhoods that were traditionally African American. They were underserved in terms of resources, and some of them were fourth and fifth generation of being in there, and their utility bills were unusually high. There were burdens to people who were on fixed incomes. So our organizations came together, and the first thing that we are working on, like I said, is the weatherization. One of the organizations that is a partner in Project Empower is Community Weatherization Coalition, for which I also serve as a board member on their organization. And our organization actually goes out into the community and conducts energy surveys, and that helps people understand how they can lower their utility bills. Once we weatherize homes, then we're able to go in and talk about solar and electrification and other opportunities that helps not just the environment, but income challenged people in our communities.
Thank you so much, Nkwanda. And so we're going to move now to our second poll. And so our question here for the audience is, what are your biggest challenges, and what do you anticipate being your biggest challenges? And so it's hard because you can't select more than one here. But of course, if folks select other, if you don't feel that an answer represents your biggest challenge here, feel free to add that in the chat and to contribute a part of the discussion in that way. And then while we go through these questions, I'll also hand it over to our panelists maybe to talk about some of their challenges. And so when we see sort of the results come in here, maybe addressing some of the top challenges that people are facing, and maybe you can speak from your own experience, sort of how your organization has maybe overcome those challenges and how you're continuing to evolve or grow your work in spite of those challenges. And so we'll give it another minute or so. And it's so tough because you guys are all doing such fantastic work. So to answer it in 5 minutes is really hard. So it looks like one of the biggest challenges that folks in the audience are facing is the availability of sufficient long-term funding, and also accessing enough funding. It's really hard to do that, I think, especially with orgs with limited capacity. And then sort of just going down in terms of biggest challenges, also navigating program rules, creating new partnerships, generating stakeholder buy-in. And we had so many sort of options here. But some of the other challenges that folks are facing also just included not enough local contractor capacity or readiness to work with new technologies. And then the issue of pre-weatherization work or other barriers before the weatherization work can happen. And so maybe we'll start off sort of in order of how we introduce ourselves, but also feel free for other panelists to jump in. But maybe I'll pass it to Lee, maybe to answer that sort of first challenge, maybe around the availability of sufficient long-term program funding and just accessing enough funding for a program.
Yeah, thank you. So these are all great points here, and that is the biggest challenge. It is accessing that funding. It's crazy. It's funny because when we initially started the program, we had the supply, but we didn't have the demand or buy-in from the community. But throughout the project and the success of the project, we got the buy-in, but now we don't have the supply. So supply, which is funding. So just being, I believe that there's a huge disconnection between who's allocating the money and getting it to these specific communities where the funding is needed. So figuring out ways to continue to work with our partners to apply for these grants and win these grants is something that we're looking forward to do. But I mean the idea is to create a pipeline of funding so when these projects are done, we're ready to hit the next project, because we started with 4 homes in our first project. And we're looking to do 2025 for the next project. And we can't do that obviously without the funding, for that. So setting that pipeline, for funding, has been a challenge, but we're highly confident with the partners that we're working with and the technical assistance that we have to overcome those challenges.
And if I can interject, and just to add to what Lee was saying, when we first initiated the program, we had our budget set and we thought was adequate. And it turned out we were nearly double the amount that we first initiated with, because due to a lot of, once you peel back the layers and you see that there was a lot of issues with the homes that, even though we thought we worked with a great company, we did audits, original audits, we did blower tests. And once we actually selected the homes and did the blower tests on them, we found that there was a lot more issues with the homes that required from general maintenance, general repairs. So that we had to address a lot of those issues before we can get into the retrofit issues or the retrofitting.
Yeah, I want to open up the floor to any of our other panelists, how maybe you're addressing some of these challenges that people are facing in your work.
Actually, I just want to piggyback off of what was just being shared. Not necessarily help, but it's one of those things that actually you should be aware of in trying to do this work, which is that, at least in our case, we really had to get the data in order to apply for the funding to start making things happen. And what that does is it creates some tricky situations where, so for example, we were also doing those audits, which we made sure to always call them energy assessments, like language matters with our folks. And like the moment they hear audit, and it's just like, absolute, like, nope. And so there were some very real challenges that came out of that. In one case, when we had these energy assessments done, turned out that the stove was leaking gas in this household with an elderly woman on a fixed income and doesn't have the means to replace that. And we didn't have the funds, really, at least the dedicated funds to replace that. And so we are now in this kind of moral dilemma. What do you do? We ended up just biting the bullet and fixing it because it was completely unsafe for that family member. But if we do this on scale, that's going to be impossible for us to sustain that as well. And similarly, there was some very real kind of honest feedback from some of our folks. In one case, the household, the resident was like, "Why do I need an energy assessment when I see that there's a hole in my ceiling?" It's like, yeah. Totally get it. Like, this is all just going to pull up bad news that you can't do anything about. But we really leaned into our relationships with these communities. And that's just the way our organization works. We're literally, like, our community centers are in these neighborhoods. We build these long-term relationships with them. It's like, yes, right now we don't have the funding, but we're doing this so that we can get the funding to be able to make these things happen. And so just, believe in the work that we're doing and lean into that relationship. And fast forward, and we, just a couple of months ago, landed a $500,000 grant to start doing these retrofits on 20 households of the 262 in the neighborhood. And that's just the start, but, making it work.
I wanted to say also that we call ours the tune-ups, also not audits, but tune-ups. I think the funding is always the problem for, especially for community based organizations. But I find that we need to make sure that the communities that are hardest hit are at the table when we're talking about doing anything in those communities. There's a lot of if we don't do that, then they get information that's not quite true. The gas conversation now to me is like really big to move off of that. Bringing the health aspect of it, I think is going to really help people to understand why we need to move to clean energy. So having a community to be at the table, I think is very important in all of our work.
Thank you, Nkwanda. I want to transition to another question that I think sort of builds off a lot of what's happening in the chat, and then also this discussion between our panelists around sort of language and how important that matters. So I'm curious for the panelists, if you could talk maybe a little bit about how you educated your community about energy efficiency and environmental justice. And I know, Lou, you had your hand up maybe to respond to another question, but if you want to respond to this question, that'd be great.
Absolutely. And I think for Push Green, it's kind of a dialectic. These questions are all related and they inform each other and how you decide to answer. And I would say that having come from a base of community activism has also enabled us to do the energy outreach and education in a way that really connects with people. We can kind of tell the story and say, Push Buffalo, one of the slogans, which is very, very much true, is we know what we need where we live. And so knowing that need, that guided our activism. It certainly gained community buy-in, and that buy-in helped us to put pressure upon the folks that do the funding to give us the funding. And it also helps to dispel the myth. It happens all the time. I'll show up somewhere to do a presentation, a workshop about energy efficiency, and people say, you don't get anything for free. There's got to be a catch. And I can remind them it's not free. We worked for it. And the same corporations making millions of dollars to pollute your community are helping to pay to fix it. So it's not free. You earned it, we earned it. So always keeping that in mind has really been helpful in just every approach that we have. Our I think of it as a pièce de résistance, is a program called Warm and Dry. And to speak to kind of what Derek is saying, Naquan, everybody's saying, we were doing the energy efficiency work and found people saying, I would love to, but my roof is bad. So we just started taking a list of names, and the list grew and grew and grew and grew. And we could take that list to foundations, other funders, and say, don't try and tell us there's not a need. Here it is. And so we were able to braid different sources of funding, including the energy efficiency work. We were able to inform what the program looks like, so we could address a lot of issues of requirements that just really made no sense. If someone comes to you needing help with efficiency and they can't because of a roof, the roof is what has had them cited by the city, so they've lost their insurance. So it doesn't make sense to require them to have homeowners insurance to take part in the program. So I think definitely using that lens of community activism has been one of the most successful methodologies that we could possibly have used, and directing our days that way in every aspect of the work that we do.
Lou, I think you make a really great point. I feel like a lot of programs are designed where it's like, we have this problem, we want to address it. And it's great to get benefits, into the community, but I'm wondering maybe you or others could talk about just addressing this question that was in the chat earlier, but how you engage low and moderate income communities on sort of actual ownership of these projects and realize that, especially when they have other priorities or they're operating in survival mode, how can they not just necessarily receive benefits, but also like really be active participants in programs and work like this? Maybe we could hear from Amani or others that we haven't heard from yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to kind of add to what Luana said, I think it can even answer this question. many of the challenges we're facing. To find those solutions, we need to have a community-based solution, community-driven solution, and community voices are the voices that truly matter. And I think in when thinking about power interfaith, we look at those stories, those real life stories, and in these low and income and disproportionately impacted communities, and those that have faced those burdens and faced those issues. Those stories and voices are what we feel need to be heard the most. And getting those voices to the right people, like our elected officials, like our governor, is where we believe true change can happen. Many times, our elected officials, just speaking for Pennsylvania, they want to really know what's going on, and the only way they can do that is by hearing it from us. So, community driven and community based solutions is what we prioritize. And that comes along with the work of organizations and collaborative efforts where we can have the same type of information that is like readable and, one that people can understand and relate to and interconnect to, because, these housing issues are real life issues. These utility bills are things that these are the things that people are worried about, and getting food on the table for their families. So getting the education out throughout different organizations and community groups, even, we feel is, the direct approach, where in turn we can bring those individuals into the conversation, so that they can feel a part of the conversation and part of the solution. Because at the end of the day, we're trying, the solutions are to help us as a whole.
If I can add to that really briefly, one way we overcame this is, so when you go to these communities, you don't necessarily, and this is where we messed up at, you don't go to each home first, like, hey, here's this and here's this, because they don't trust you, they don't know you. What really helped us is, going to community members who actually have a strong presence in their community, having a conversation with them. This could be other organizations who have some sort of the same initiative, or just members of the community that, are popular or just have that presence to get the community to help buy in. Go to them and explain, what you're looking to do, and kind of, collaborate with them, because the community knows them and community trusts them. So, and leveraging that relationship to get this information out has helped us a lot.
Thank you, Lee. Any other panelists want to comment on how to build community buy-in and leadership, as well as power through this work? Oh, Johari, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Sorry about that. It also helps, as Lee was saying, to, to employ, people within the community that are, or, have a tie to the community, and employ them and engage them in the process. Education is the biggest thing that we've found. Educating our community as a whole, whether it was virtually, in our case, where we're rural, we couldn't do as many virtuals because we also have a broadband issue. So broadband is at a premium in our community. It's a luxury item. It's not the standard. So we've had that. So we've been engaging in, actually in person. We just had one, a recent record turnout for in person, just in December. And, and so these workshops that we're providing in that education to our community, and you get to see them one-on-one, and that builds up the trust, but also you get to hear their voices. They're not as quick to fill out a survey, more so they are to talk in person after they, got to see what the program is all about.
Yeah, do any others want to touch on maybe how they engage in workforce development efforts in their programs or in their community to support some of the retrofit work?
I'll add in that it always helps to have partners, and to find partners that maybe are able to complement where your own organization might not have its true strength at. So in CAN's case, we partner with Elevate, but also the City of Ann Arbor's Office of Sustainability and Innovations. And just like everything in this work, so much of it is about relationship building and really kind of towing the line with these different partners. What in our case, about 2 years ago, started off as like this crazy idea of like trying to decarbonize the neighborhood, and not even having done that work before, but also realizing that to my knowledge, in terms of established communities, that hasn't happened anywhere in the US. And so, but we not only had faith in it, but we also had the willpower to bring in enough partners and chip away at it. And eventually got the University of Michigan involved as well. And then now we're at the point where it feels unstoppable for what we're going to be able to do.
I agree that familiarity and partnering, the community being a part of it is very important. We went in with this project as the NAACP, so that everybody in that community knew about the NAACP and had worked or partnered with the NAACP at some point. After we introduced ourselves as the NAACP, then we sought out the leadership in that community by attending their monthly community meetings and building relationships with that community. And now, as we move forward in our planning, those members of the community are a part of the planning. It's very, very important that you build those relationships in going in. They're the ones that take root, and you're able to grow from that.
Thank you, Nkwanda. I wanted to touch on one question that I think some of you sort of addressed in your introductions as well, but maybe we could talk a little bit in more detail about it. But I'm curious to know, how does the marginalization of your community play a role in the housing disparities that you see?
If I could speak for Pennsylvania, housing is one of our, top issues. And speaking even from where I live in Philadelphia, I used to work for a state rep in Pennsylvania, and one of the top things I saw, like as a legislative assistant, was housing issues, and many of those things were home repairs due to things like weather, or just homes being extremely old and just not having those upgrades that they need. So I think, it's very apparent that there's inequalities and inequities that we see, especially in different areas. Like Strawberry Mansion, for example, is a predominantly African-American area in Philadelphia. And as a whole, Philadelphia, there's many African-Americans that reside in those neighborhoods that they reside in are those facing many of these housing disparities. They often have homes that are even uninhabitable. And when you go 5-10 miles down, you can be in a completely different neighborhood. So there's a lot to address there, but we want to really focus on those that need those home issues immediately. There is this home repairs program is an amazing step. It's $125 million for our state, but we know that we need much more than that. So I think addressing the funding that we need to, handle these issues is a large conversation, is the whole of the conversation. We have to continue to fight for funding and make sure that, as we said already, the funding is going in the right places. But, as far as those disproportionate impacts in those low income communities, you can see it just by driving around the city. It's very apparent. And, it's not something that cannot be looked at. It's not something that can be ignored. And, we have to continue to fight for the funding, which can get us the jobs and the assistance and the housing that we need.
If I can chime in our rural community of Pembroke Township, we just got a zip code within the last 15 years, 12 to 15 years. Before that, and even though we are one of the largest townships in the entire state of Illinois, and even at that time, we were nearing 3,000 people. We're down because of since the pandemic. I know we're around 2,500 now. But you're talking about a community that was severely marginalized for decades. And I mentioned redlining. They just lift the redlining ban when we got a zip code. So many of the homes during in our community were do-it-yourselfers. So there's a lot of that we see in our community, and just homes that just have degraded because of just not being able to properly address the issues. And so that's what we're dealing with in our community, and the marginalization.
So I'm curious to know, for folks that are able to, when you're actually able to make these projects happen in homes and communities and hopefully benefit tenants as well, has anyone successfully here worked with landlords or renters and also maintained affordability after improvements are made?
In Gainesville, we were able to get our commissioners to make rentals a part eligible for weatherization and other programs. We went through a lot to get that, to get the rentals included, and there is a provision in there that doesn't allow the landlords to go up on their rent for a certain amount of time. And yeah, so we've dealt with that. I wanted to say also that gentrification has played a major role in dislocating people who are financially challenged because they were not able to keep a lot of the homes up. Then though the codes enforcement and these other agencies of the city, allowed gentrification to happen. And we're hoping by doing our project that we'll get ahead of the ball a little bit by going into those homes and helping those people who are not financially able to do that now, but to help them so that they'll be able to keep their homes. They won't take out our neighborhoods that are over 100 years old, 6 and 7 generations. We can kind of head that off.
I would have to agree. That's been very, very important to us. Housing stock is ancient. Homes were built at times where there was no concept of, insulation. Hazardous materials might have been used. So in our in-house programs, we require landlords to not raise rent, based upon, well, I did these improvements, so now. And then also in the warm and dry program, which helps homeowners. Homeowners are required to stay in the home 10 years to kind of live out the lien on the home. But then if, say, a mother, which has happened, a mother wants to move to Florida, she's had enough of the Buffalo winters, and sells the home to a family member who is also low to moderate income, then they can kind of pick up the lien and keep going. So the whole goal of that program is to keep LMI homeowners in their community. So when the phone call comes from the real estate broker that's like signed up for a list and I'd love to buy your home, that they can say, no, thanks, I'm fine, not interested. So that's definitely a priority in fighting gentrification. And then also keeping things affordable for renters. If they can't pay a gas bill that's the same as their rent, then, they're more liable to get squeezed out of our community. So very, very important.
Thank you, Lou, for sharing. I want to sort of go back to earlier, one of our poll questions, figuring out sort of who was in the audience today. And I think there's a lot of folks that are representing government. So, local, state, and probably federal government here. And this is a unique opportunity here directly from CBOs. And I think a lot of you have identified some challenges, and we recognize that you can't do this work alone. There needs to be support there from government as well. And so I'm wondering if some of you could talk about the role of local, state, and federal government to make this work easier and more impactful.
Yeah, just thinking, just to touch again on the whole home repairs program, that was a collaborative effort with Senator Nikhil Saval, who introduced it. However, there was support from state legislators across the state on both sides, Democratic and Republican. It was something that, I'm very new, like maybe three to 4 years into this work, but from people I was able to talk to with my experience in seeing the whole home repairs being passed, this is something that had not been done before, where he had received so much of that electoral support. And with that support, we were able to have those legislators educate their constituents and community around the whole home repairs. So I think that's another just example of that, like, community driven effort, where at the end of the day, like, we want to get this information to the community because they're the ones that are going to receive the funding and assistance that they rightfully deserve. So as far as elected officials, we're looking at them heavily. We want them involved in the work we do, supporting the work we do, and being able to advocate that when they're able to speak and talk to their colleagues, even, for example.
Outside of funding, which is obviously like probably number one, I think what's also important from local governance is access. If we had access to specific data, that would definitely help with these programs, because it kind of is a proactive approach where they can give us information, or or homeowners who actually applied for certain weatherization or any type of assistance in this area. So that helps when we look at outreach and when we're marketing, selling these programs to the community. So obviously accountability on their end, but also, giving access to certain information definitely will be helpful.
And I think that, reaching out and working with the local officials, whether it's your immediate mayors and supervisors, as well as your, state representatives and senators, it only makes good sense, because at the end of the day, we're improving their community. We're their communities. We're making improvements that betters the quality of life for their residents. And they're supposed to be representing, these are their constituencies that, that hire and elect them to do just that, to keep them safe, to keep them, increase their quality of life. And so that's what we're doing on the grounds level with our community organizations. We're doing that work. So it only makes sense that we collaborate with them. So in a partnership to make it happen.
And we can't assume that our elected officials understand what the situation is. We have to educate them also. It's very important that we do that, because they are led a lot of time by their staff, and their staff, it may not feel like it is to their best interest to give them certain information, or to give them the information, but not in a way that it is truly beneficial to our community. We've had to really pay close attention because our utility company hasn't been willing to go as far as the community wants it to go. But they're the ones that are talking to the elected officials, and our environmental groups do the best we can to get to them to explain what's really going on. I mean, they use words like, the staff, we're moving towards cleaner energy. No, that's not what we said. We said we want to move towards clean energy, 100% clean energy. So the staff is allowed to promote gas rebates. So we're trying to stop that and make sure that our elected officials, all of them, understand that there's a difference between clean energy and cleaner energy.
Thank you, Kwanda. I think that's a really great note to end on. And so I want to say, or rather express my sincerest thanks to our panelists today for sharing their stories and their experience. I think it's incredibly valuable. And I hope folks today walk away feeling sort of energized to do this work and begin tackling similar projects in their own communities. And it's great to see the chat so lively and folks making connections. And so I know some of the panelists have put their contact information in the chat, and then also on the slides, we have links to each of their websites. And so you can learn more about their work directly. But I want to just give you all a round of applause and thank you so much for joining today. And I'm going to pass it back to Stephanie now.
Thank you, Alexis. Wow, thank you so much for our incredible panelists, and to Alexis for moderating. What an amazing note to end on the first day of the R2E2 Summit. I'm sure we're all leaving with our heads and hearts full from everything the panelists and our speakers have shared today. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us today, especially those who participated during the entire day of the summit. I'm quickly going to transition over and share my screen so that I can close out. So let me just bear with me a second. Can you all see the agenda for tomorrow? Can someone just let me know?
Yes.
All right, great, thank you. So here's a look at what we've got on the agenda for tomorrow. We have an in-depth session on leveraging federal funding opportunities to make this work happen, where I will actually be presenting with Jamal Lewis from Rewiring America, another peer exchange session, as I mentioned earlier, and a session on centering community-driven planning and policy and program implementation. As a reminder, if you have difficulty joining the Zoom meeting tomorrow, it is possible that we have met our attendance cap of 1,000 participants. I don't think we had that issue today. In that case, check your email for instructions on how to access the live stream of the summit on YouTube. If you are not joining us tomorrow, please be on the lookout in your email in the next week or so for the summit materials and a feedback survey that we would greatly appreciate you filling out. If you applied for the stipend for community-based organizations, we will contact you after the summit. Stipend availability, as I've mentioned, may be limited based on demand, but we will try our best. And that's it for today. We hope to see you tomorrow. And again, thank you all so much for your input, for listening to all of the speakers, for your comments, and we look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Have a great evening.